And we're live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Bevry discussion group. This week, we're going to be discussing the 8th episode in John Vervake's lecture series on awakening from the meaning crisis. I don't know the content precisely because I haven't actually seen the episode myself. And if I need to be held to task for that, please let me know. But I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Prior to beginning the recording here, or the broadcast, we started in on some very interesting topics. And yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing those up and finding out what it is we're actually discussing. So.
Yeah, so the lecture is lecture 9 from Vervake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Yeah, it's 9. Yeah, titled Insight. And he goes into kind of the meditative, I guess, functions from meditation and like what you're able to do, or what the very active, like cognitively going over a problem or being aware of a problem is, and like the different ways in which you go about it. That's it. It's one element to it. I don't know, pleasure of doubt if you want to go into sort of the more larger picture of the lecture itself, maybe.
Yeah, sure. So he's talking about, the last lecture focused on mindfulness, and this lecture gets more into attention and insight. And he's talking about, attention being sort of a way of tuning, he calls it tuning optimization, and that there are different sort of layers that our attention can go back and forth into. So the theme is sort of this looking inwards and looking outwards. And you've got these two indices. He makes it sort of a schema, a graph, which I know, John, you've
yeah, we can get into that.
Did you want me to talk more just in general?
Yeah, just in general, and we'll definitely go into that schema. One of the interesting.
So is the context for all of this discussion essentially the nature of insight, how we develop it, what it is? Okay.
Yes,
and that insight for him isn't just coming to some realization. It's really a realization about sort of the depth of humanity itself. Your place in this world. Your position in the world and the way you experience the world. And this is the goal of meditation and contemplation. He makes the focus that a lot of the time in the West, there's this big revolution in meditation in the West, and I've taken part of it myself, but a lot of the times we mix up in the West the difference between meditation and contemplation. And meditation is this looking inward. So you're scaling down, you're looking, you're first focusing on just one thing in your thoughts, and then you can get into, eventually, if you do it enough, you can get to this pure experience of pure consciousness.
Right.
But the other way is going back up, and that's the contemplative experience, where if you scale up, you can get to this sense of being at one with the universe. And they're both useful on their own, but if you only deal with one, if you only look within, you get choked up because you don't see the bigger picture. You miss the bigger framing. And if you only look at the bigger framing, you miss a lot of the smaller details. So the goal is to have a process, a practice where you're training to scale down and training to scale up. And that's what the different meditative practices through the Buddhist sort of eightfold path, and John Vervake teaches all of this stuff.
It's fascinating. Like, this is important wisdom, right? And we have this kind of encoded within even popular aphorisms. Don't miss the forest for the trees, right? This is a direct prohibition against locking yourself into one aspect.
Exactly, and I think the what I gathered from this lecture is that in doing meditation and doing these contemplation exercises, you're practicing. So what you're doing, yes, you can have these experiences, these cool experiences that people have, but I think what the goal is you sort of talked about it like, training a muscle, is that the more you do these exercises, I think the more then you can bring that out into just the regular world in terms of your daily operations and daily, interacting with people and processes and thoughts, and do both of those things, the scaling down and the scaling up, and get better at that to have, I think, a better, well-rounded picture of everything.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Vervake is like bringing forward. Like the whole like primary focus of his lecture series is the meaning crisis, like in the West that we have right now. And so the act of meditation is a way for people to get a better grasp on how they're interpreting the world and understanding their place in the world. And that is what leads to a more meaningful life for them.
Okay. Visual thinker here. Announcing myself. So prior to this, starting this conversation online, or broadcasting it rather, we were discussing maybe an important element of how we should begin our conversations, which is announcing the visual, cognitive, or other processing tasks that we're using, right? So I'm a very visual thinker, and so that will shape the world in a particular way. And other people are primarily auditory thinkers, it seems, or they focus more on like logical relationships, or they can narrow down one particular view. So yeah, we think it might be very meaningful to have discussions with other people that you're conversing with to narrow down or broaden our view about what it is we see each other as capable of doing, and also maybe what we're really, really good at. It's not just capacity, but like how much capacity we have. Okay, so as a visual thinker, I'm envisioning a box with a little man inside it, a homunculus. And he has a big red button on a table, and that's the only thing that exists in his room, little box. Big red button. And when he presses that red button, a little flap opens in the wall and a donut flies in, right? And he gets to eat the donut. It's delicious. But every time he presses that donut, button, the donut comes in. On the outside, what he isn't seeing is this big contraption that's actually like squeezing people into a machine, right? And that's what's creating the donut.
It's people. We're eating people.
That's right. Soylent Green. When he presses the button, he gets a donut. That's all he ever knows. He knows that pressing that button makes him happy. Mm-hmm. Outside that box, the screams and cries of these human beings ground up for donuts.
Right. So now for him, there's the causal relationship between hitting the button and receiving a donut. And that's the only thing that's within his frame of understanding between the two. So that's the only connection that he'll have there. When in fact, there's
what does his moral system tell him from within that point of view, right? Mm-hmm. And locked within that point of view, you'll never convince him that pressing that button and eating the donut is a bad thing. But if you were to crack open the top of the box and then allow him to see the apparatus that was transforming human suffering into donuts, mm-hmm. right? That's a totally different prospect. So I think that is the danger, right? And that's in fact what's happening all the time. That little homunculus is inside each of our heads, and we're all eating donuts, right? Social donuts, based on little social buttons that we're pressing when engaging with each other. And many times we have what in economics is called an externality, a negative externality that produces this problem. So yeah, okay. So here's what's really interesting about that, because can we bring up the graph? We started drawing a graph.
I was just thinking, like, this almost seems like this goes back into your gripes with Twitter again, where people are interacting with Twitter, getting their donut out of it, but at the same time producing.
And they're absolutely convinced that donut is super delicious to them. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I got 100 donut likes. Oh, it was so good. Clearly, I'm being useful for 100 people. Meanwhile, 10,000 other people who didn't interact with your thing other than to read it were really pissed off by what you said, right? They're really pissed off. But yeah, don't worry about it. You got those 100 donuts. I think that's happening all the time now. As we increase the complexity of these systems and also increase the distance between the cause and the outcome, I think this just naturally occurs. So
yeah. Sometimes it also brings in the experiment that he started off with, if you want to sort of go through the video, where So he starts off with this experiment with a cup, where you take an object, a cup, and you take a pencil or a pen, and he has everybody close their eyes and start tapping the cup. And what he has you do is he has you shift your focus through the different levels. Did you guys, or those of us who
I'm doing it right now. I'm practicing.
Yeah,
walk me through it.
So,
I'm tapping a can, it's not a cup though.
So you're tapping the cup, and at first he has you feel out, the contours of the cup or whatever object that you feel. You're tapping with your pencil or pen, and you're feeling the different, aspects of the object, tapping all around it. And then he asked you to shift your attention and focus to the probe itself. The pencil or pen is a probe, the object you're using.
Or your finger, whatever it is that.
Or your finger.
Yeah, where did the pencil? Okay, finger.
Well, he has you hold a pencil, with your hand, and then he goes into the finger.
Okay. You're tapping it with. Okay. I was using my fingers, but whatever. All right.
Right. So I did that the first time too, and then I realized. So you're tapping, and then he has you focus on the movement of the probe. So you're still tapping, but now you're not focusing on the object of the cup. You're focusing on the movement of the probe itself.
Mm-hmm.
Then after you do that, he has you change your focus to your fingers holding the probe, and the feeling of your fingers moving back and forth, the finger holding the probe, and so at each level of I call them levels of abstraction, sort of from information theory, but at each level, your focus changes. And when you're focusing on the cup, you feel the cup. When you start to focus on the probe, you feel the probe, and suddenly you don't feel the cup anymore. And then you focus on your fingers, you don't feel the other two. Mm-hmm. And you can go back and forth between these different layers, and it's pretty cool for people who do this, where you really do feel your attention shift, mm-hmm. and that we're sort of doing this. Really, we're doing this naturally, all the time. He talks about letters and words. So we have, when you look at individual letters on their own, they don't mean anything. They have to be put together into a word. So the letter doesn't mean anything without the word, but the word doesn't mean anything without the letters. And you would think, well, that must make reading impossible. So we have these features at the bottom, and we have what he calls the Gestalt, sort of the framework at the top. And to understand, say, a word, you need to understand both the features, the letters, and the whole word at the same time. And that we are instantly doing this. That we're not looking first at the letters and then at the word. We're looking at the letters and the word together at the same time. So this back and forth process is happening instinctively. And then, of course, we have the word, which fits into a sentence. So there's no feature that is just a feature. The letter is a feature of the word is a feature of the sentence. So depending on how you shift your focus, it shifts how you see it. So, this is just like you said.
So define feature then.
So the features are the criteria. So, we talked about the features of mindfulness being present, not judging, insightfulness, increasing equanimity. And these are traits. So that's called sort of the spotlight effect. But what he says is the spotlight doesn't take into account the entire framework. So if you just focused on the traits, you don't. So like you said, the forest for the trees. If you just focus on the trees, you don't see the whole focus.
Right. So bringing in Tyler's example, you could say the feature is donut pressing a button and the opening of a flap, something like that. When you're bringing in the Gestalt, you're bringing in the functionality. So like you're assuming, let's say, from the homunculus perspective, there's the function of pressing the button results in the feature of the donut. So without having an awareness or an understanding of what causes the donut to come into being, or at least into awareness, do you actually have a firm understanding of the thing? So like we brought this up, I think in like 2 lectures or so ago, where the chair maker has a better understanding of chair than the person that just designs the chair, but has no ability to actually turn it into the thing. Like he has the kind of like same understanding of what a chair is from a kind of conceptual perspective, but he doesn't have the capacity to turn that intellectual idea into a reality that the carpenter does. So having the Gestalt or the functions, the function of a thing is having the ability or the knowledge of how to make that thing into a reality.
Yeah, so feature is how a thing can be used.
Well,
it's part of it, but remember, each of these things can be used. Like when we went through the cup, we were looking at the different features. Like you could go into your finger again, and then just focus on each of the parts of your finger on the cup. So we're going between feature and frame in the same object, just constantly. Like at one point, your finger's a feature.
Yeah.
I
think the process of going on when you go back and forth is determining how the feature is to be utilized. That's in fact. So all right, so let's go. I was talking about the basketball earlier. Just imagine a basketball, and you look at it.
This was offline just for
Yeah. Okay. So the basketball, right? You look at it. You can tell me what it looks like on the outside. This is a descriptive feature, right? And we don't ordinarily think of it because we're not paying attention to the tapping that our eyes are doing. But that's what our eyes are doing. They're doing their own tapping. They're probing, right? And so the feature of the basketball initially that I'm worried about, the salient feature, is that aspect which integrates with the visual system itself. Now, if I broaden it and start to ask questions about the ball, well, why are there lines on it? Why does it have little ridges, right? What's it for anyways? I start to incorporate other aspects of its featurehood, right? It's like, how can it be utilized in the world? Oh, it's round. If I pick it up, it feels really good in my hands. Or maybe
but then when you're looking at the bumps, and maybe that, I don't know the physics of it, but it probably has something to do with how it bounces. Suddenly that's the framework, right? That's the frame of the ball. Suddenly the ball, we've looked at the features, and then we're thinking of the framework of the ball, which is
right.
designed in a certain way.
So let's say of the ball with the rest of its environment. So if you have the same basketball, but it's in space, there's nothing for it to interact with. There's no bounciness to the ball itself. The ball, the bounciness property of the ball itself has to be in relation to the arena that it's within.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that moment when I ask the question, what is it for? What are its features? In that moment, to answer it, I must incorporate something outside the frame. I must necessarily incorporate something outside the frame. At the very least, it's an aspect of the frame I'm not aware of, like my visual system, until I alter my awareness, right? Just like the tapping of the finger. Mm-hmm. So at the very least, that's occurring. But here's another. So it's a spotlight shining on the ball in a dark environment all around. So it's just the ball. Now we widen the spotlight. It's sitting on a basketball court. And there are men in jerseys. And they have basketballs in their hand and they're bouncing up and down. Immediately, boom, now we know what it's for. Just the act of seeing it. Okay, I've got it, right? But now, spotlight goes back on the ball, basketball court disappears, spotlight widens up, and it reveals a bathtub, a very large bathtub, and water draining, and you're about to be sucked out, except right at the bottom there's a little hole, right? And it's just about the size of a basketball, but a little bit smaller. What's a basketball for in this scenario? Right? Mm-hmm. The immediate thing suggested is that it plugs the hole and it prevents the water from rushing out, and you're not going to be sucked down the drain. Now this contextual relationship is what tells you the feature of the ball, right? It has to be that relationship between physical, so let's use Vervake's language, structural functional relationship between the arena, right? How it actually interfaces with other elements on the landscape.
Right, just to bring it out, just as Vervake explains, the sort of Gestalt is also equivalent to the eidos, and he just calls it the structural functional organization. So we're talking about this Gestalt framework, is structural functional organization of and again, we can look at everything on different layers. Like, a basketball player who understands the physics of the ball probably has some advantages where that player can use the ball in a way that other people aren't instinctively necessarily be able to do.
Yeah, you can take him and put him in a scenario where he can utilize that ball in a million different ways that other people couldn't.
Maybe even without having like a mathematical understanding of the physics to what he's doing, even.
Math. You mean just an intuitive, embodied sense of how.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's different ways you can get that understanding. Someone could just spend hours bouncing the ball in different ways and figuring things out. Or he could talk to the designer of the ball and say, well, why are all these dots? Why are these little indentations in there? What does that do? And how could I use that? How could I spin the ball in a way that could give me an advantage? So there's probably a lot of different ways. But I think Vervake's point is that if we're not constantly going down within and then back out, we're not really, we won't get those insights. So to get those insights, you need to go in and then you need to take it back out. And I think you talked about the forest and the trees. And I think a lot of the time in these discussions that we have, I notice there are people who stay focused almost solely in the trees and they're just dealing with the minutia all the time. And there are other people who are focused almost solely on the forest. And they're just staying at the high level, and if you bring up something lower down, they just sort of fluff it off. And really, that they're both useful, they're both essential. But if you're not bringing it back in, if you have your overall analysis of the forest, and then you look down and you say, well, some of those trees, this is a pine tree forest, and then suddenly you notice some birch trees, and if you just fluff that away, then you're missing something. You have to then, if you notice those birch trees, you have to reassess your view of the forest, or else you're going to run into problems. I guess it depends. I mean, sometimes it may not matter, but there are times where
could you call it a pine tree forest if there are a few birch trees there within it?
Okay, all right. So let's say. Okay. Default position of all human being at time 0 is inertia. It's momentum of whatever position they currently hold. Think of it like that. They have we're assuming a solid state, frozen state. They just are the way they are. In order to alter that human being, you have to put energy into the system, right? You got to put energy into them. So when you're engaged in a conversation with someone, and they have preferential abilities of zooming down or zooming out, it's an indication of probably an efficiency mechanism in the brain, right? What is easier for them to achieve? So that's their initial preference. So if it's easier for them to get lost in the woods or lost in a single tree, that's just the natural direction that they go. In other words, that's rolling downhill for them. So if you get a good sense of what a person is preferentially doing in an argument, you can get a good sense of how much extra energy it's going to require to get them to zoom out versus zoom in. So let's say the problem is you're talking to somebody that's lost in the details and doesn't see the broader picture, right? If they naturally prefer to just keep zooming in, if you keep trying to yank them out into a broader picture and they're not, they're let's say they're antagonistic to you, the likelihood of that occurring is probably very small. So maybe there's another way to reframe that process as another level of zoom in.
Well, maybe I think another way, I think there are people who are naturally good at one or the other, which is why they tend to focus on one or the other. And while you could say optimally they should go back and forth, but I think we have to be realistic that without a lot of practice, a lot of people are going to naturally do one or the other. I think maybe the approach is to have a conversation where we get each of them to recognize that both approaches are useful. And then what they can do is work together to say, I have my micro approach, my zoomed in approach, you have your zoomed out approach. You're good at that. I'm good at this. Let's work together to, I'm going to point out, I'm on the micro, I'm going to point out the things you may have missed. And then you're going to take it and reintegrate it into the big picture. So I think what we need is cooperation between those people if someone can't do it well within themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So what you're doing is, so if you can't have a good conversation in your own mind, you're like outsourcing. Okay.
Well, people realize
that's actually the broader, that's the broader goal of the Bevry initiative to begin with, is this collaborative wisdom process, where we take our own limited perspectives, our own deficiencies, and we supplement them through conversation to gain knowledge and perspectives we never could have had on our own.
Right. And that's the tough part, because I think, like you said, people get very comfortable with their micro or their macro views, and the world makes sense to them that way, and they feel it strongly. I know, you're saying you're visual. I'm more word based, thought based, and so I like to get into those micro details, and I try to bring it out. Probably sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So the trick and focus is to just have a conversation like we're having now, where you talk about the benefits. I mean, this is where I think Vervake did really well, is showing how they work together. But if you can't convince the person that the other view is useful, then that's where the conversation's just going to fall apart.
Yeah. Well, so you know what I've noticed in Vervake and Vanderklay's lectures and their discussions in general is that the process by which they utilize this tool, I think, is one of learning the vocabulary of the other person, right? And learning which elements are synonymous and which are antonymous. Have I ever said that word before?
Antonymous.
Antonymous. How do you? I've never said this word before.
I don't think I have either.
Yeah, and that brings up like what you were saying earlier, Tyler, about how like you have to take into consideration like what is the energy expenditure that is going to have to take place. So like when I'm speaking to people like you guys that have watched the lectures, it's easy enough for me to use words like Gestalt or Asian arena relationship or psychotechnologies as words in order to get my meaning across towards you. But if I was to just talk to somebody else, these are all very much Vervake-centered terminology, and it would not be exactly the most energy efficient way of communicating myself to somebody else. I'd have to either explain to them what is meant by the word itself, because that's kind of the thing. For certain languages that we have at our disposal, we can't communicate an idea without, I don't know, describing it in a much more further way.
The forest for the trees analogy is great for this,
right?
And I think I prefer, again, framework to Gestalt. Like Gestalt, again, just sounds too technical. Where framework, people get that. But you're right. In talking with just people out there, I think if we just describe it as simply as possible without getting into I just the pine and birch example, I think probably does a pretty good job of getting the general point.
All right. And we should get into the schema that Vervake actually lays out during the lecture. So let me pull that up here. Share.
And Sumit was really good at explaining it. Sumit, do you want to, when John brings it up, do you want to?
All right. You guys see that?
No. That doesn't carry across as easily into the visual.
Oh, no. I see it. Turn on gallery.
I know, I'm kidding with John. That's why.
All right. So
I attempted to laugh saliently.
Yeah, I want to go through each of these particular things, and then we can talk about the broader thing. So do you want to go into transparency and opaqueness there, Sumit? So this I guess just as a broad thing to set the scene, this is kind of his, he was bringing up the active awareness itself, like when we use our awareness and how we use it, and this is almost like the feature list as well as the function list of awareness itself. And what was can you see my mouse?
These are the different ways we can focus our awareness.
Right. Can you see my mouse cursor?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yeah. All right, Sumit, you want to go into start with transparency and opaqueness?
Yeah. So I'll start by giving you an example, maybe the same one that Vervake used, right? So let's say you're holding a basketball in your hand, right? and you have closed your eyes. So you are feeling all the different, you are feeling the texture, you are feeling its shape, right? And you are getting a sense of what the object is. So now your entire brain's resources and your attention is focused on the ball itself, right? And what the shape is, right? The texture and how it is feeling, right? And then as you are doing that, right, you can move your attention back to your fingertips, like how they are feeling, what is the pressure, like index finger is feeling more pressure or thumb is feeling more pressure, and then from that you can go move back to your palm and the muscles in your palm, how they are moving, how tense they are, right? And from then you can move your attention to your wrist, that your wrist is feeling a lot of pressure, and then you can move back to your forearms, and then you can move back to your biceps, as in your biceps are feeling this tension, this pull, because you are holding that ball in your hand. So what we are doing here, right? So when we were just focused on the basketball, right? So everything was transparent, all our muscles, everything, because we have directed our attention to the basketball. And as we were moving back into the palm, the forearm, and the let's say biceps, we were moving in the opposite direction of opaqueness. So it's no longer transparent what is happening there. We can feel it, right?
Right. So at the beginning, when we're just feeling the ball with our fingers, we're feeling all the ridges. We're feeling the ball through our fingers. Then when we shift our focus, so our finger's transparent at that point. When we shift our focus to the finger suddenly becomes opaque. So it's the same process.
And the basketball becomes transparent in that same act.
Right. Right. We no longer feel the ball. Although we have it in some way, or else we drop the ball, right? So it's still there. I think he called it the subsidiary experience or awareness. So we have and then as we focus on the finger, suddenly the finger becomes opaque, and then we could, and when the finger we're holding through our arm, and then we could make the arm opaque, and then we could get back right into our sense feelings, and then our experience, and eventually, I've never done this, but if you get through meditation up, you can get to just the pure experience of consciousness, a pure consciousness experience.
Right. And that's with the scaling up and scaling down in general.
Right.
But okay, so that's a good explanation of transparency and opaqueness. Now, if we can get into the transitions between the Gestalt or the eidos, the function of a thing, versus the features of a thing. So
I had an okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sumit.
I had an analogy for that, just to explain by an example, and then you and POD are really good at laying out the general theory. So maybe we can do that.
Okay.
So one example that comes to my mind is Gestalt, or this functional. What is the correct term? Let's just say a framework of looking at the world, right? So let's just say I have a framework of looking at the world where I feel, black people, they are not terribly smart, and they create trouble, they are violent, and all that, right? So that's my general framework of looking at things. And to move down to the specifics would mean that where this black person is from, he went to Harvard, he went to MIT, he has a PhD in physics, and all that. So we are getting into the granularity of things, and what that does is that it breaks up your preconceived notions about things. As in, I already had a framework where I thought black people are like this or that. So how do I break it? Right? I get into the specific, I get into the data, I say, okay, so this person has been given 10 awards, and he has made so much contribution to the science, and so maybe my model is incorrect, not all black people are like this. So slowly I'm beginning to break up my model, and as I come across more specific data of that nature, I will be forced to revisit my general model, the general framework of the way black people are. So that's the one thing that focusing on the granularity or going down does that for you. And but then he was saying that's not enough. So then you have to come up with a better framework. So if you so yeah, that's where I would like you guys to take over.
Yeah, and you laid out a good example, and also Vervake brings up. You see what I drew up here? So let's see if I can highlight this or circle it or something. I can circle it.
We see your pencil and your highlight.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll just use my mouse cursor then. Okay, so right here, this drawing, these 3 scratches, is close to identical to these other 3 scratches here, where if we were to kind of remove the letter to the left and right of these 3 scratches, and also remove the letter of these 3 scratches, we would identify them as being the same, having a same identity between the two, like, or the same semantic meaning of the letter H or the letter A, or just 3 scratches. Probably if we removed the rest of the letters in this, we would be unable to understand what this was supposed to signify. It could just be 3 random lines connected to each other. But when we have these 3 letters in relation to the T and the E next to them, we get the word the there. And then when we have these 3 scratches in relation to the C and the T next to it, we get the word cat there. So a different letter between the two, even though it's the same kind of 3 scratches, which is also kind of, it's interesting to think about for handwriting analysis for AI, things like that. But I think this kind of brings in so for the features of this, we could look at the 3 scratches themselves. Like, these are the 3 features of this thing that I have here. But when we have the broader context of the T and the E alongside of it, we reinterpret these 3 scratches to be the letter H. And so that gives us the Gestalt of H for these 3 scratches. And then separate, or it's not really separate, but it's different from the features of it being 3 lines in a row. So it's not like, and then we could do the same thing for over here. So the Gestalt of the thing is in relation to its broader context of the C, like the Gestalt of these 3 scratches it's the letter A because of the C and the T next to it. The Gestalt of these 3 scratches is the letter H because of these 2 letters next to it. So yeah, okay.
We could look at this drawing you have where we could describe it as, a red square with a purple line going down with a point on it going down, and another purple going up, and some letters, and then we could take that purple line with a point on it and describe that as an arrow, right? So we've gone from features to Gestalt there, and then we can take each of those parts on their own and we can put them all together, and we have a schema. So the entire table, with all the words and all the arrows and everything, that's the schema. And we can look at each of these on its own level. At every level, so what he says is, there's nothing that's just a feature or a framework or an IDOS. That you have the line with the point on it are features, and then they become an arrow is the Gestalt, but the arrow takes place within the context of the schema. And we could broaden it out further. The schema could be in a broader approach of a worldview, or
or even in just this conversation here. Yeah. It's the schema isn't in relation to us having a discussion regarding Vervake's lecture.
So at every level we can zoom in and zoom out, and we do a lot of it unconsciously. We just do it at the same time. None of these items on their own would make sense. It's only seeing them together in context of the structural, functional organization that we can make sense of any of it. And what he points out is, you would think, again, if you only looked at it one or the other, you couldn't analyze any of it. If you only looked at the lines on their own, you couldn't analyze it. If you only looked at it as a whole without thinking of what's in them, you wouldn't understand it. Each depends on the other. We're doing it at the same time.
Right. Okay. And then he draws the diagonal line between them in regards to what was it? Contemplation is kind of the scaling up effect. Like when we're scaling up, we're contemplating a thing, and then for scaling down, we are meditating. So it's
or more that meditation is an example of scaling down, and contemplation is an example of scaling up. So not that we're always meditating when we scale down, but that's what those two exercises are designed. That by meditating and contemplative practices, we can get better at scaling down and scaling up just all over the place. That they're exercising. I mean, that's why he calls it a practice. You know, it's that, you know, yes, you can have these amazing experiences for people who really do it a lot, but I think even just for people who don't do it that much or don't get to that point, the idea is it will get you better at analyzing just everything, and that's what leads to insight.
Yeah. Maybe I should stop the formatting when we're speaking, but since I think it's only showing the screen, so we can't like make any I can make visual hand gestures to you because we're in the same call, but for the audience, they don't see it at all. But we'll stick with this for now until we finish it. But I like what he says in the lecture. He relates the act of like moving between the scaling down and the scaling up as almost like an exercise, or like you're doing a rep. So like when you're breathing in, it's I think scaling down or scaling up. I'm not sure exactly, but and when you're breathing out, you're doing the opposite, and you're like shifting between one and the other.
Inhaling is scaling up, and exhaling is
scaling down.
Scaling down. Or that's an exercise that you do. And just so you know, on the screen, we see the diagram and we see your face in the corner, so they can see your hand gesture.
Oh, in the stream? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, and that like has been really helpful for me in at least getting a better understanding of like what the act of meditation is for people, where it, or at least for Vervake, in going through this kind of process of really focusing intently on the self and like their awareness. So like, or your own awareness really. And then scaling up in a way where you're not even considering yourself as part of the frame itself. So he goes into like the furthest extent that you could do with scaling down and reaching a point of this it's fully awareness of the like yourself as an agent. Like he brings in the agent arena relationship, where like the scaling up is getting a better understanding of what the arena is, and the scaling down is getting like a better understanding of what the agent is, like what the features of the particulars and that kind of allows us to even like see the world. If you scale all the way down, you reach a point of not even there being like an ego, but just awareness qua awareness. There's not even awareness.
Talk about a pure consciousness experience where you have consciousness, but not of something. And I got to admit, I have a hard time understanding what he means by that, because I haven't experienced it. So I'm very curious as to what that is, because when we talk about consciousness, we talk about experience. So it's usually an experience of something. I'm either thinking of something, or I'm looking at something, I'm feeling something. I don't really know how to even contemplate. Like I can't, make sense of what consciousness without being conscious of something even means. He calls it a pure consciousness experience. So there's some experience, like something is happening. There's some sense. I mean, that's at least how I describe it. But we should look up how people describe it. I have to admit, I don't get what he's saying. I don't know, Sumit. You have more of an idea of what he's talking about there?
Well, I also have not experienced it, but like I was telling you before, right? I went on the meditation retreat. So, remember earlier I was telling you, you become more aware of the muscles in your biceps, right? So the same process you can apply to your mind. Like for the most part, let's say you are daydreaming, so you are just lost with your thoughts. Everything else is transparent. You're just flowing with your thoughts, right? And then there is a one level behind that where you can just observe those thoughts. You can just observe things that are happening in your body, any kind of pain that is arising, and you just observe it. And whenever the thoughts come, you are separate from the thoughts. You just are watching them. So that has actually happened to me when I was meditating. So if you meditate
that you felt yourself separate from your thoughts?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Can you go into more detail about that? I've meditated off and on, but I've never felt that. So I'd like to hear about that.
That happened like last year. So like I don't like can't be do justice to what actually happened. But what I can say is, as I let's say meditate regularly, I can almost you see how you can see the horizon, when the light comes, like slight. So I can only feel that, slightly now, that feeling. How would I describe it?
Well, it's interesting. Vervake brings in like the story of Siddhartha, where after Siddhartha goes through a fuller understanding in it. Right. After he has his own awakening, the people, they can see there's a change within him, and they ask, like, "Are you a god?" And he says, "No." Like, "Are you a prophet or an angel?" And he says, "No." Like, "Are you just a man?" And he says, "No." And like, "Well, then what are you?" And he says, "I am awake." And the point that Vervake brings up in is he's not identifying with any. Let me see my notes. He's not identifying with a thing.
He's not identifying with a feature or a landscape.
Yeah, he's identifying with a way of being. So it's and maybe that's part of it. Like it's not identifying with the thoughts that we have or the conscious experiences that flow into our awareness. It's identifying rather with, or it's not. It's relating yourself, I guess. Yeah. So identifying with the ability to be aware itself.
Yeah, the thing that translates in the process
is determine
the frame, right? What your frame is, and that is the conscious observer, and the conscious actor, the agent. Those are those two elements of consciousness that we always come back to. The passive reception of information, it's the processing, and then the construction of something, right? You have those two things. You can be given a gift from the outside world, and then you can take what you were given and construct something with it.
So you could like identify yourself completely with the arena. So like, I'm just the participant in this conversation here. I am somebody that's just here in my little screen over on the side here, and I'm speaking just in regards to this conversation. Or you can focus instead, like the arena itself is just a byproduct of, or it's not I don't know, maybe not. It's a component within my own experience, but it's not the like founder to my experience.
Like that these mystical experiences that if you meditate enough, and I think Sumit, you sound like you were sort of progressing towards one of these experiences that some people have, where they come out of the experience and they say, no, that was real. This, our waking world, is what's not real. And it's an interesting, and I've heard this, people who have near-death experiences often describe having a realer than real experience. And it got me thinking, what does it mean to say that one of these are real? Like, you have this insight that experience was more real than real. And you have people, and he talks about people who, what Buddha did and what people do is they remake their lives, they reinvent themselves, they change themselves to be able to get back into that experience, because that experience is so amazing. And now,
I think I understand the reasoning for like why it is that, okay, so when I wake up from a dream, I say, oh, that dream was not real, but where I am now is real. And I think there's kind of this asymmetry where when I'm outside of the dream, I can relate what happened within the dream to my own life as I'm experiencing it currently. But for certain experiences, and if I was to go back into a dream, all of my past life would be kind of like disremembered. I'm only experiencing myself in that moment as I'm dreaming. For Rick Strassman, he did a lot of like experiments with DMT, and for many of the participants, they would enter into some sort of like, they would describe it as kind of this alternate reality or alternate dimension, something like that.
Altered state of consciousness is how Vervake.
Right. But when they would come out of it, they would say that the altered state of consciousness was more real than the world that we live in right now, or it's as real, exactly as real. And I wonder if it's because there's some sort of there's no disconnection there. Where, okay, so bringing in like Tyler's example from earlier, if you're the homunculus within the little box, the only thing you experience is a button and the donut that's received. But if you were to pull that little homunculus out, they could see, okay, the pushing of the button causes it to squish all these other little homunculi and shape them into this donut. That gives him a broader understanding of both his prior state of awareness of like what was in. Maybe I should turn off the.
No, the graph is good. You can.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll go back to it then. It incorporates both his prior state of awareness and also this new state that he's within right now. Whereas if he were to return, and maybe if you return the homunculus back into a square, that might be sort of a red pill moment where he wouldn't be unable to experience his life normally of, oh, I'm pushing down the button and I'm receiving this positive feedback of a donut, because there's this new awareness that's brought to his attention that he can either disassociate with through cognitive disassociation or dissonance, right. Or he'd have to change his salience towards pushing the button and maybe like turn it into something that he's not going to ever do again because of how much death it occurs to all the other homunculi.
Well, see, it's interesting, because, and now it wouldn't work for the example you just gave, but in terms of because in the example you just gave, it matters what's real. You know, I think we would say it matters if, you know, my donut is made of people versus not. But in this experience,
I'm glad you feel that way.
but I wonder in this experience if it matters if it's quote unquote real. Like, for example, they've done experiments with LSD and other hallucinogens where they hook people up, you know, to whatever the brain scans, and they see some pretty major reformatting. So we could say the idos of your brain, or I guess the features of the brain reformat, where the path that I'm terrible technical talk, but you know, the synapses realign. A bunch of areas shut down, so a bunch of areas of, I guess, normal cognition shut down. But for example, in the visual cortex, the pathways change, and suddenly there's a lot more pathways to that visual cortex, which is why I think people have these amazing visual experiences on these drugs. Now, what if, like, he talks about these mystical experiences that you can get yourself into. Now, what if these are just getting our brain states, you know, through focus, but temporarily rerouting these brain pathways? So we have these sort of realer than real experiences, which are real experiences that our brain waves, our brain patterns or synapses are realigned, and we're suddenly having these very visual, very visceral. I haven't had this myself, but I've heard a lot of descriptions, for example, from NDEers talking about.
Would you like to?
I would like to, but the question is, does it matter if it's real? If at the end of the day, what this experience does, and just the desire to get back to it, alleviates, like you just said, this existential dread that people have and the anxiety that we have. And he says what it helps people do is resolve this modal confusion, this confusion that we have between the arena and the agent. If it helps us alleviate that stress and alleviate our own suffering, does it matter if it's real in the sense of a mystical, spiritual, showing some alternate dimension that's real, or it's just allowing us to reframe ourselves? I mean, and this links into religion, because as he explains, in almost all the major religions, that at some base, there's been these experiences that are sort of at the center of them, including Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and, the major world religions. And this could be evidence that, I'm a non-believer. I know there are different views, but this could be evidence that these experiences are evidence of different brain states, but that have led to sort of these world religions because of how they're interpreted. But it shows also the usefulness of these experiences and these interpretations in how we orient ourselves. So, it's sort of like Plato's noble lie. Does it matter? Does it matter if it's true? I think this is up for grabs. Does it matter if we tell ourselves?
Well, you have to probably start defining truth if you want to discuss that, because it sounds like you're referring to something like a correspondence theory of truth that's attaching itself to a material object or a state outside of the subject. And I think that's pretty right. That, like, our modern conception of finding truth is very much based on the scientific method of, go out and measure something and tell me what it is, delimit it, tell me what its boundaries are, and tell me what it isn't. And then that's essentially what this scientific...
Well, for now, let's talk about real in terms of how he described it, which is these people having these experiences where they wake up from this enlightenment type experience and they say, no, that's what was real. This world, our normal everyday waking experience, is what's not real. Let's
it seems like it's very much tied to what is salient. So I know for like people that have gone through like ayahuasca or ceremonies or something like that, they experience some sort of event mentally that helps them reconceive the actions that they're doing in a way to see like what it is that they're doing that's negative or positive for themselves. So
to use Vervake's language, it alters their relevance realization.
Right. So like I've heard from one, I can't remember who it was exactly, but somebody discussing like how going through this experience allowed them to see how their smoking habit was like actively killing them and like helping them to reconceptualize like, okay, why do I want to kill myself? Like,
so that they're changing their idos about the features of the smoking, and they're changing their whole conception of it.
Right. Or like in the homunculus example, there's reconceptualizing what is the function behind the pushing of the button. And like, I don't want to push the button anymore or I don't want to smoke anymore because it's doing something that I don't want to achieve as a functional end. Yeah.
But
so life...
Oh, sorry.
Life is a little bounded system. Your body's a little bounded, complex system, and in order for it to continue functioning, it has to ingest resources from the outside, and then excrete the waste somehow. That's always happening, and we get used to thinking of it purely in the dietary terms, but it's all of our sense data too, right? Everything coming in is a processing system.
Well, our diet is how we get the energy to have any senses. I mean, that's what lets us.
Right. So all of those are incorporated systems as support systems for the processing of information up here, right? Which is where we localize our desires to engage with the arena. And we choose to identify with, you watch children again, things in the world. Right. So once you can grasp something with your hand, it becomes mine. And it's that connection with the outside world that helps establish what you in fact are. I am a thing that grasps, right? And as your capacity to grasp enlarges,
Sumit, you're upside down.
Yeah.
He's just hanging out with Ben. Don't worry about it.
I have no idea why
I'm
I'm
having an
upside
awkward
down.
experience right now. What are you taking right now?
Why would I be upside down?
Wouldn't that be cool if instead of the person who takes the hallucinogenic drug, everyone around them hallucinates instead? So somebody walks into a room and like, everyone starts hallucinating. You're like, wait a minute.
Well, I think was it in the lecture or somewhere else where I don't know if one of you guys were saying it, where he was talking about there are animals.
It keeps on flipping it.
Who roll.
Yeah.
We're talking about humans, are one of the only creatures who take this experience of, ingesting hallucinogenics to have these experiences. But there are animals who I guess they've concluded will roll themselves down a hill to get dizzy because they like that experience of getting dizzy. So that we're not the only creatures who do.
Yeah, he was saying crows. I actually tried to look it up to find what he was talking about. I didn't find any videos of that exactly. I found one instead of a crow sledding down a snow-covered roof. It has like this little saucer plate that it would pick up and fly back to the top and then sled back down. It was quite fascinating to see. I think I've seen something similar to that for like.
Yeah, it's quite clear that animals play. It's quite clear. Come on.
Oh yeah.
Anyone who's ever had dogs or cats, dolphins.
This is about the conclusion is that they're trying to seek these alternate
states of consciousness.
Alternate states of consciousness, right? Just in a similar way to us, which is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to just bring it back.
Hold on, wait! I didn't get to finish my point. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's an important one. It has to do with the relevance realization and the identification process, because as the child reaches out in the world and begins expanding their grasping capacity and elsewhere and their other modalities, their other senses and the way that they interact with the world, that's how they develop their identity. So by the time they're 20, they have an identity. I am smart. I am dumb. I can grasp. I can't grasp. I can ride a bike. I can't ride a bike. All those things are elements of an identity. When you take a hallucinogenic drug, it's like rewinding the clock back to 5 again, right? It puts you in a more primal brain state so that you're no longer attached to all those many objects that you integrated with in the world, right? You're no longer, it's almost like you just wind the clock back. You're no longer at the place 20 years down the road where you have 1,000 interactions grasping a particular thing, right? So I'm not good at basketball anymore. Look at this hand, right? Horribly configured for basketball, right? I can't identify with playing basketball anymore. But if I had played basketball for 20 years and done it, I have a little trophy. It's right over there. My kids are playing with it. I played in 6th grade. I have a trophy from playing basketball. I have the memory of being a basketball player. At the time, if you had asked me, are you a basketball player? I am. I wasn't as wise as Siddhartha to answer that I'm awake merely, but that's how I would have identified. And I think what happens is when you go out into the world and there are no more basketballs, when you played basketball for 20 years, that's a collapse of identity. But this is happening all the time in a world where the connections that you have with the external objects are extremely ephemeral, right? In a complicated world where there's not just a basketball, but 10,000 different objects for you to grasp and identify with, and they're all shifting places and positions and relevance within our culture, identity, personal identity becomes extremely difficult to attach to the external world. So this actual process of reframing identity based on the perspective that you're taking, zoomed in or zoomed out, I think it's vital in this environment that we're in right now, where there's a high degree of complexity and dynamism in the system.
Well, see, this leads me back actually into the point I wanted to make myself, which is, and which I was leading to before, which is, okay, so all these major religions may have been based, at least to some extent, on these mystical experiences. Now, what Vervake has set out here, and that having this kind of experience can help resolve the meaning crisis, is it really it paves the way for secular meaning, and that's the big question a lot of people have, to non-believers. Well, what do you replace? I'm not an anti-theist in the sense that I think religion plays an important role. I think it's done some bad stuff, but I think there there is a very important role that religions have had in terms of community, in terms of building a sense of self and being in the community, all these things that we're talking about. But I think what Vervake is saying is that there is a path to a secular version of that, because nothing that he says here depends on these, I think, these mystical experiences really being some altered, some real spiritual realm. And I think Vervake's a non-believer from what I remember.
Right. Well, he's a Buddhist, and
but sort of an atheistic Buddhist.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Very much so. And well, it brings in part of something he brings in, I think it's in the first lecture where he asks his audience, like, okay, if you were to find out that your partner was cheating on you, would that have great emotional negative salience for you? Like, this would be like completely break down like what you knew your entire relationship was with them. And they would say yes. And if you were to find out that or would you want to find out that they were cheating on you? And then they would also say yes. So we have our notion of salience and importance and meaning is very much tied to what we believe to be real. So if like we wouldn't want to be in a relationship that we thought was entirely false, even though we've gotten a lot of like positive experiences from within the relationship. Our sense of meaning is directly tied to how real, ontologically real, the source of that meaning is. Like if we were to discover that all of our life and identity was part of some big broad lie, this would devastate us for a lot of people. And I think that's part of the
okay, wait. What happens after the devastation?
Well, it causes one to have to either leave behind the identity one had, so like as with your example of a basketball player, or to experience great suffering, knowing that there is no other identity that they can adopt. So like if you were...
But what Vervake is suggesting is that there is a route forward for everyone through the meditative, contemplative practice.
Which direction do you go?
You go both. That's the key. That's the key. That's his main point. This is what he gets to at the end. He says there's the third way, which is where you go in both directions, and that's really what Buddha did. Buddha took these two traditions, the Vipassana, which is looking in, and the contemplative one, looking out, and he brought them together, and I guess in a way that previous traditions hadn't. And that's the key to resolving this existential dread. If you're not doing both, you're probably missing out.
Well, I mean, with Buddha though, there's I don't know. I can't really speak on that. I'm my point though was that our sense of meaning is directly related to our sense of the reality behind the thing that's giving us the feeling of meaning. So but
maybe it's not though. This is what I'm wondering. Like maybe what he's getting at is we're missing something. Like, listen, we have these world religions, and clearly these independent world religions, if you took their mythology at face value, they can't all be true because they're contradicting mythology. That being said, people clearly get very similar benefits from following each of these world religions. And maybe we're missing something, that maybe it is not the truth of these religions that is what is giving people the benefits, that that these religions are packaging something that allows us to
well, you also have to consider that they're experiencing the benefits of these religions from within a very isolated framework. Sort of like, I mean, I know it's kind of tainting the example, but like as the homunculus within the box, like they're not experiencing their positive experience of their religion when they're being constantly faced with alternate possible like mythologies. Say like you can have the secular mythology of our history, or the Buddhist mythology of our eternal history or past, or the kind of literalistic fundamentalism of Christianity of like 6,000 years. Like these are all like the mythologies that we have, but you can't have multiple mythologies that are contradictory at all at the same time.
But clearly,
why can't I have 3 or 4 homunculi sitting inside my skull, all with different ideas?
No, but what I say, like, clearly, you can get the benefits without it being true, because all these religions they can't all be true, right? Because they have contradicting stories. At least what's described in these religions can't all be true.
Wait, so if you're going to say that, try to be a little more precise, perhaps. So the total truth content can't all be the same, right?
Right.
So there can be overlapping elements.
Right. Exactly. Sure. But so there can be, so maybe your belief as to whether it's true might be important, but whether or not it's true can't be what's giving people the benefit, because we know people are getting that equal benefit, or at least similar benefits, from divergent religions and philosophies. And it may be the same thing with philosophies too. You know, that it may be that what's important is having a framework for meaning rather than being correct about your framework. I mean, I have the instincts too, that I always want to know what's true, but I ask myself, like, I don't know that makes me happy. Like, I think in a lot of ways it doesn't. And I think about people who don't think about these type of things, who don't go that deep, or think about, the Matrix, the guy in the Matrix, the guy who says, you know what, he makes the deal with the AI that he wants to go back in the Matrix. He doesn't care that it's not true. He was happy in the Matrix. It was nice in the Matrix.
I was going to bring him up earlier.
Cypher. Yeah. Ignorance is bliss.
Like our instinct is, oh, that's terrible. But part of me says, you know what? He'll be happy. And is our goal?
Wait. Happy for how long?
Well, presumably till he dies, if they're keeping him happy.
Till Neo collapses the next iteration of the Matrix.
Well, sure. Until presuming it stop. No, and there's going to be a lot of misery once Leo gets rid of the Matrix, and suddenly they wake up.
I'm so glad you brought that up, though, Pod. Because when I asked that question, that's where I was going to go next, and you just kind of ran off with it, but you ended up bringing it up anyways. That's so beautiful. Because that's my question. Which direction do you go? Do you go down back into the Matrix? Do you isolate your sense of identity within, all the, just isolate yourself? So all of those rude interruptions from the outside world telling you that you're no longer a basketball player or no longer a cipher, do you just ignore those and go back in the Matrix? Or do you broaden your perspective and include now the world of the real? And this is always the question. Is it the real world which is at fault? Do I have to contend with that by ignoring it? Is it a false signal? Is it noise? Or am I getting true signal and I have to alter myself?
Right, but what Vervake's almost getting at is that it's not the realness necessarily of the world. It's how we interact with our experiences. It's how we interact with everything around us, everything that we experience.
He definitely talks about the reality of it, right? John brought up that point before, that the reality of something, or its realness.
Reality from the epistemic perspective of the people that are experiencing.
Yes, we have to be convinced that what we're dealing with is actionable and real. Right?
Like, what does it mean? I mean, I don't think any of us, correct me if I'm wrong, have had this realer than real experience. But what does it mean to say that that's more real? It's a feeling of.
What do you mean by realer than real? What do you mean?
So for example, I've read a lot of accounts from NDEers, and what they talk about is the vividness of their NDE, that their NDE experience is much more vivid. Now, I interpret this as, your brain, the visual cortex has extra connections at that point, and other connections are broken, are not functioning. So you have this vividness. But Vervake talks in a similar way of these people who have these enlightenment experiences, and they come back and say, no, that was realer than real. That was real. This real world isn't. But what is that? What does real mean in this context? I mean, like, they were having a real experience. I mean, that's for sure. But what does it mean? What does it mean to say that that's more real? I don't know. I haven't had the experience.
So when they say that, it's probably more information is the sense of it. It's like more fidelity to the sense that there is something outside. So, okay, there's two. I'm gonna say there's two elements. Well, this is coming from a perspective of someone who's experienced states that you're describing. Okay. So, okay, so it's two things. One, it's a sense of incontrovertibility. So you don't have the sense that you can attack its reality in the same way that you have the sense like when you wake up from a dream. It's very easy. You have a sense of waking up from the dream. I can question the reality of that dream, right?
Except it goes further because they do wake up from this experience.
No, I'm just describing the difference of the feeling. That's all. I'm describing the difference of the feeling from the subjective experience of someone experiencing that. The other state that this would describe as more real, you don't have that sense. Even though it can be fantastical, you can take a psychedelic and you can see things that you know are not real, and yet you don't have the corresponding feeling that you can attack its reality. So there's that component of it. It's kind of emotional.
So in that context, say of that, what does it mean to say that that is real? Like you said, because you've ingested.
Yeah, so I'm trying to add to that. I'm trying to answer that question. Yeah. So there's that element of it. So you have a sense that you can't attack its reality. Okay. So whatever module of the brain gets kicked into gear when you're being a skeptic, even though it's phantasmagorical imagery, perhaps like on a psychedelic, it still doesn't come in. Now, why that is, we can talk about. Perhaps, yeah. So why that is, whatever. But that exists.
It's the killing of the skeptic part of your brain.
No, it could be, right. It could just be that there's a module not being interacted with. Yep.
But you're talking about an experience and an interpretation of an experience.
Yeah, okay. So if I were to draw you a picture of a bird and ask you if it's real, right, and it looks like a 3-year-old drew it, you said no. But if I took a picture with a high-res camera, you're still not really convinced, but you're getting closer towards it. Like, yeah, that's a picture of a real bird, right? But then if I told you I filled in each pixel hand, right, just made it up, right? So like, does it match real birds that you saw before? You start testing it. You start doing these.
Talk about the hallucination that you're having under.
So the other experience is that's what I'm starting to build up here is this notion of the amount of information related to it. So you can think of it as resolution in a video sense. If you're watching a YouTube video that's 480p and you see these kind of ghostly low resolution images, you're not quite certain of their reality. But if you watch high definition 4K, whatever, you're less and less inclined to say, oh, that's not real.
Wait a minute. I'd like to. I haven't taken those kind of drugs. I'd like to. I don't know how to buy them, but I'd like to at one point have that experience. But if you see, say, if you're sitting in your living room and you see, say, a pink elephant, as the stereotype goes, you're not seeing a higher resolution of a pink elephant that's really there that you didn't see before. Your brain has. You're right. There's more information, meaning, like, I think the synapses in your brain are getting more information to the brain, and that the image comes from information. Like all of our images, all of our experiences are translated through the brain. That's where the information comes. It comes from the outside. It gets translated in the brain. So you have the experience of a pink elephant that may seem very real to you, but intellectually, if you analyze it, there wasn't something that matched.
Right. So we can say, let's define, I mean, I can be a little more technical, right? So if you're looking at a picture of an elephant and that information is coming in, you can define a bit rate or a data transfer rate, like how much information is being processed through those systems. Right? And if I show you a lower resolution image of that elephant, there's actually less information being processed through the brain. There's less.
Right, but a hallucination, the information's coming from within the brain, not from without the brain.
Right. So now instead of looking at an elephant, recall a memory of one. And this is a capacity issue again, right? So some people have a greater or less capacity to recall elephants. Some will have a greater or lesser capacity to recall the visual aspect of elements, right? They'll be able to remember technical terms like pachyderm, or the fact that there are 2 major kinds, Asian and African, or whatever, right? And they can start listing features. But you are engaging parts of the brain that are recalling sense data, which is attempting to match its fidelity to the original signal that you saw in the world to a greater or lesser degree. So if you can recall with perfect fidelity, like an eidetic memory, the shape, color, everything of an elephant down to the hairs that are poking out of its skin, right? Then you can say that this is a much more real thing. But if you can't recall anything about an elephant at all, what can you say about an elephant?
All right. But we're talking about this experience, this realer than real experience that different people have talked about. In what sense? Like, again, like we're not talking about a higher resolution view necessarily of something.
No, I am. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying it appears as.
That may be how it appears, but whatever you're seeing isn't really there. So it's coming from within. It's not a higher resolution of what you're seeing in front of you.
Well, imagine, but it's something, okay, so imagine you're looking at the elephant and that you're getting full fidelity image, full HD and it's passing into the eye and then it's getting processed, no information lost. Now imagine I stick a little wire in your ear and I interrupt the signal and I start adding noise to it, right? Nothing's changing on the outside world, but I'm interrupting the processing of the signal itself. Now this happens all the time. I can hit you in the head and make it happen, right? I can interrupt your visual processing and you can get all sorts of wonky on it and start not trusting it, in fact, right? Because the actual shape of the world has changed. The information rate and the way in which you've ordinarily processed it over not just your own life, but the physical structures that are present because of all the lives before you, right? The genetic components of the physical structures that process the information.
I hear what you're saying, but I think it's still not getting at a hallucination, which is a hallucination is, I don't think we can say it as just seeing what's there in a different resolution. Your brain has orchestrated, has configured something that's not there that you see as if it's there, and you can't tell. Like for people who have mental illnesses where they have hallucinations, they can't tell the difference. They'll see or hear.
They can learn to, though.
All right. Mm-hmm. So in lecture 7, Vervake brings in like one of the examples for how we determine a thing is real or not. And he brings in kind of these 3 principles. To rationally confirm a hypothesis, you check that your sense organ is operating normally. So like if like you were drunk, that would be good indication that this was like you were not indisposed in some sort of way, that you weren't able to what the usual form of understanding the world was not changed in some way. The environment is too noisy. So like if there are a lot of other things that are also going on that might have confused you or distracted you or made it so that this thing was unlikely to occur. And then also that you're in agreement with others that also can experience the thing. This is a way in which we generally confirm or falsify different hypotheses that we might have. This is how we kind of come to know that something was real or not.
So in that framework, putting yourself through meditation into an altered state would be similar to getting drunk. So we should normally conclude, okay, that's not real, except what he's talking about is people who are convinced.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the feeling is the exact opposite. The feeling is that certain parts of the brain are functioning at a better capacity than they were before.
But that's a feeling, right? So
that's what we're, that feeling, certainty and the feeling of reality is a feeling. It's a sense that we have.
Something we could probably test too. So like okay, so people that are drunk have a lesser capacity to inhibit their behavior. So if somebody that's sober, they have a greater capacity to inhibit their behavior. So we could test also like somebody on hallucinogenics or something like that. Do they have a greater or lesser capacity to inhibit their behavior, or are they unable to understand or comprehend certain things that sober people are able to do? But I think that's a good way, is like being able to test the functional processing of a thing based upon their capacities that they have. So if, like we brought up, like Tyler, you said that when you had this this experience, it was as if you're like the resort to being skeptical about the experience was kind of lost. So it might be that either this thing was so real that you're unable to feel rationally justified in being skeptical of it, or it could be that you like lost that capacity or that faculty in that.
Well, yeah. So I mean, let me say this: like the module for skepticism. So in my own, I guess I can only talk about my own experience as much fidelity as I'm comfortable. So the module for skepticism in my own brain, underneath the influence of psychedelics, does not disappear. In fact, it actually goes the opposite. It goes hyper functional. And I start processing information in two ways, it seems like. One is a kind of pure experiential, I guess, pre-analysis state. I was talking about some of that before. And the other is trying to keep a running narrative of those things which differ from the outside world, like the real world that I'm accustomed to. Because those elements of difference, I have decided ahead of time, may be important in the process of discovering why I, in fact, took anything in the first place, or why suffering exists at all, and, you know, all of that stuff. So, and related personally to information contained within my brain, right? Experiences I've had. So
it doesn't inhibit your ability to care about past preferences. So, like, I don't know, if you were going through a sense of ego disillusion or something like, or maybe that's too far. That, but like, if you're in a hallucinogenic state, you still understand that, I have to go pick up X, or I have to call to make sure that somebody else picks them up because I'm in no state to actually drive right now. Like, you could be, like, for certain experiences, you could become so wrapped up in the experience itself that you're unable to even consider things that
happens all the time.
Are important prior to that.
Yeah, it happens all the time, which is why I can only speak to my own circumstance, because you have lots of stories of people that take a hallucinogenic drug and they jump off of a building thinking they can fly. Now, I did that at 3, okay? When I was 3, I jumped off the back of a slide after watching Superman, convinced that I could fly. And I landed right on my face.
Did you have the cape?
I had a cape. I was at preschool, so, or daycare, whatever they call it, I guess. But I did not have a cape at the time that I was, maybe that's it, John.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. You have to have the cape in order to fly like Superman. You'll have to
try it over again. Like an eagle instead.
I guess this comes back to, like, again, does it matter if it's real? And again, what is even real?
Okay, right. Yeah. So that's what I meant by having to define further what true is and what, in this way, you're saying it, what is real. So you can always reframe something. So I can say, though I'm seeing a pink elephant, right? I know that there is not a pink elephant in the room, but what is real is that I am seeing a pink elephant. The illusion itself is occurring, and also maybe there are other elements. Oh, pink still exists within this illusion. Therefore, there's some element of congruence between this illusion and my real world experience of a color pink, right?
And also elephants.
But they, right, exactly. So because
but there's a discongruence there, I guess.
Because let's say they have an experience of something that doesn't, say, have a real world comparison.
Okay. This is great. So I was looking into theories of binocular rivalry recently. And this is fascinating because it's
what is that?
Okay, so binocular rivalry is it's always occurring in your head right now, but you can become more aware of it if you present each eye with different images, right? So if you we've got a business card here and a wallet, right? So if I hold these up in front of my eyes, it works much better with, like, simple shapes on a piece of paper. And you try to focus on one or the other eye, you find out that your eyes are kind of competing for attention. You can't really see both at the same time. You can't see both shapes at the same time. They superimpose on each other. They kind of go in and out. And in fact, you can kind of alter the rate back and forth between left and right and shift it back and forth. Sometimes you don't even have good control over it. Some people will indicate that they don't really have solid control over which one happens to be more salient than the other. So this phenomenon of binocular rivalry is it's a very deep problem, let's say, in cognitive science, because it may be bordering on things like quantum mechanics.
All right, and you brought it up in relation to like how real a thing is.
Yeah. So when you're doing your binocular rivalry adjustments, this is very similar to holding a present and a past image of what is real in your mind, right? There's a comparative element that you're going back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I think what normally helps in a real situation is if you have, so if I've seen 10,000 elephants, right, on the 10,000th and one, if it's pink, I think, maybe it's me, right? But if I see 2 elephants and one of them is gray and the other one's pink, I don't think it's me. And there are like these stacks, I think, of what is it?
Like aggregated past experiences or inferential.
It's like, certainty. It's building up to certainty, right? And yet nothing, everything in some sense is ephemeral on a large enough time scale, right? Everything is ephemeral on a large enough time scale.
All right, so then why would certain experiences that are completely foreign and new and novel, like that, what you would get under ayahuasca or hallucinogens or something like that, why would these be seen as more real? Because they kind of don't associate with all of our past experiences.
Well, okay, so when people are talking about this, I guess this is maybe the element I should have brought up first. When they say something is more real than real, they're not talking about the pink elephant, I think. They're not saying, ooh, maybe there are really pink elephants out there. They're saying that the experience that they had was convincing and meaningful on such a level that it contends with the same, and in fact supersedes with the same experience they have with the real world. That's what they're saying. And I think it has more to do with the elements of experience which are not, or the least ephemeral, perhaps. So those have to do with like pure geometric shapes, right? Like, so you talk about ayahuasca, right? So that's going all the way to the end of the breaking through spectrum, right? So that puts you in a place that you literally can't even talk to someone else about unless they've experienced it, because you can't talk about it.
I see. So
But prior to that, well, go ahead, get it out.
Okay, yeah. So for a smoker, a lifetime smoker, the experience of smoking is fully related with, or is fully embodied within a positive salience experience. Like they get the dopamine rush from the smoking. In the room. Yeah. Right. They get the breaks off from all that. So then to go through and experience something that would completely reformulate their way in which they thought about all those things. It seems much like it's changing the entire history of, like, okay, it's now saying that all these thousands of gray elephants that we've had experience, I was actually in the wrong there, because I was, let's say my cognitive faculties were mistaking the color pink for the color gray, in the same way where, like, a smoker, they were interpreting the smoking experience as a positive one, and then through the whatever ayahuasca ceremony or whatever, they're now reinterpreting it and realizing they were in the wrong for all those.
What Vervake says, what he says is, it doesn't matter what the content of the experience is, it somehow optimizes their capacity to make sense, both inwardly and outward. That's how he sums it up.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, John, you were saying that the realization is that the error is within the subject, the apprehension of the data. But the realization is not that I apprehended it incorrectly, I think. The realization is that all 10,000 elephants before, I was mistaken that elephants can only be gray. They can, in fact, be pink. I've seen one be pink. And on another planet somewhere, 10,000 light years from here, there may, in fact, be pink elephants. And if we play around with genetics, we may, in fact, one day create pink elephants. Now, isn't that weird, right? And in fact, 200 years from now, when CRISPR is, like a home hobby kit for your seventh grader.
I think they have glow-in-the-dark rabbits now, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so well, that's actually been done in the lab for a long time now. That's the fish process, where they attach luminescent. So yeah, but you can clone now and start making all these adjustments. So the point is that the relevance realization is not that you were incorrect in receiving something false about the outside world, is that you were incorrect about your identity with what you associated with your knowledge of elephants. And so to move it over to cigarettes, you had 10,000 inhalations, 10,000 cigarettes, okay? And you defined myself as a gray elephant, as a cigarette smoker, and nothing other than that. And meantime, that's one part of your brain, by the way. It's like one part right over here. It's related to your ego identification. Meantime, way over here, this part of the brain that's, paying attention to the landscape itself is saying, wait a minute, every morning you wake up coughing. Every morning you have 5 people around you that are telling you you should stop. All of that stuff is accumulating in what we call the shadow, right? So if you take a hallucinogenic drug that opens up the other parts of your brain and prevents you from being localized within that one little box, it's like cracking that box open and saying, oh no, those aren't donuts, buddy. I mean, they are, but let's open that donut up and see all the little people inside. All right, let's look at the broad perspective.
So you could think of it like their identity as a cigarette smoker was coming in conflict with, say, their identity as a grandparent,
Yes.
and so rather than holding on to their identity as a cigarette smoker, they decided to make it more transparent by focusing instead on the grander identity of, say, being a grandparent. Grander.
I'm not saying that that's a determined outcome either way. Let's say they just started smoking and everybody else around them smokes too. So nobody's telling them bad information. They're not giving them a negative affect. And maybe they're not coughing yet. Mm-hmm. And maybe they get an actual nicotine buzz from it. And so they don't really have any shadow side being built up from long use that's indicating there might be something wrong. So if they were to take a hallucinogenic drug, they may in fact have the experience of wanting to smoke more. Now, I don't think so, but I'm just saying that I think those kinds of relationships can develop. It has more to do with unlocking these hidden associations that we try to ignore in much of our life, right? As well as going even deeper sometimes and unlocking incongruencies at like bottom layer, at the perceptual layer itself, right? The immediate apprehension of things.
So this kind of brings in, like, with Pleasure of Doubt's question, like, why do we even care that a thing is real? And like one reason is that it's not like everything is such a tightly closed system as we might imagine. So like you could be Cypher and take the blue pill and return to the Matrix and live out the rest of your life being happy, wealthy, and getting everything that you want. But in real life, if we're to return to a state of delusion or to just try to imagine this novel thing this pink elephant that we just saw as being an anomaly, then we are okay. So we can either isolate ourselves away from never experiencing this thing again, like, oh, I'm swearing off of hallucinogenics. This is just too much for me. I can't handle it. This is completely goes against my entire worldview that I have right here. Or we can, and that's like a viable move, really. But I think part of the reason we want our beliefs to be real is due to the ramifications that can come. So like I could imagine that I don't need to work for a living because there's like everywhere I look there's food nearby me. I'm going into kind of mixing my metaphors with the Aesop's fable of the grasshopper and the ant. So the ant, he's able to he works all the time during the summer, and then during winter he's able to survive. But for the grasshopper, whose minute experience is just the summer, sees that, all of the experience that I've had before is telling me that I'll be able to live off of the land just fine. But once winter comes, that illusion is fragmented and falls apart. And I think that's similar to like why people care about whether or not their partner cheated on them in a relationship, because there's a great deal of trust that has to be placed on this partner that if this vow that they have taken, or even just a social contract that they have made with each other, is able to be so easily dismissed, then you cannot trust them for other situations as well. And that's why it is like very important to know the reality behind our relationships with others as being real in a lot of ways.
Yeah, real means predictable and usable.
Yeah, reliable.
Reliable. Yep. Reliable.
Well, because look, I mean, Vervake's focus is that, as I understand it, is that all of this is the benefit is helping you reconcile your modal confusion. So helping you resolve modal confusion, and that's what reduces anxiety. But when you think about it, our modal confusion, is basically our way of interpreting ourselves as an agent within the arena. But this is a psychological process. I mean, if I lost my memory all of a sudden, right now, I would be very confused. I'd find myself sitting at a computer with some strangers on the screen, wondering what the hell I'm doing here. But because I have a memory, I know I'm part of a conversation where we're streaming to YouTube, and I feel comfortable. But reality hasn't shifted. My perception of reality has shifted. The second between.
Wait. No. All right. This may, but reality has shifted.
My internal reality, but
wait. Yeah, but from my perspective, reality has shifted. If I'm looking at Pod, you changed.
Because you can no longer like relate to him. Oh, we just talked about this 5 minutes ago.
Yep.
But what I mean is
Wait. All right, I know, but this is what I mean. Like, I think this will help. The reality has changed. The problem is it's the reconfiguration. It's a local reconfiguration inside this boundary here. So reality changed in your head, but it didn't propagate outwards, right? And to the extent that it can propagate outwards, that's the reliability of it, right?
But if this experience is the major benefit is that it helps you situate yourself within yourself and within the world, regardless of, you may have a very different perception of yourself than somebody else has. And as long as, when it's like when you suddenly realize somebody who liked you doesn't, it just changes your whole conception. But what changed from not being distressed to distressed is your
model
relationship with how you perceive the world. Now, say suddenly someone said they didn't like me and I thought they liked me. It's possible that I could not be distressed by that. So we talk about reality, but these aren't it's my feelings about how I'm interacting with the world, my feelings about this person liking me or not. It can drive me crazy, or I can say, can't like everybody. Nothing has changed outwardly in the world other than, again, my own perception. And it seems like that's what this is getting at. It's not as much real in terms of figuring out the laws of physics. It's about resolving this modal confusion. But the thing there is, does it matter how you resolve it as long as it's resolved? Your suffering goes down when you resolve it, even if maybe it's not that well founded. Maybe you're mistaken about some key factors, but that gives you that great sense of, I know my place. I don't know.
My guess is that the experience you are having can be something of a out of the world experience, like something that has no bearance on your relationship with reality as we know it. But there are two aspects to it. So this experience you had, does it have to relate to the real world, or it has to be some kind of alien experience that is novel, or you never had, right? That is one aspect. So what if this more real than reality experience look just like your reality, but maybe a little bit different? So that's one. And another one would be to look totally different, something that like mind-blowing. And the another aspect is whether you believe it as real or not, right? And I think maybe those two forces have something to do with it. So I don't think, my guess is it won't work as effectively if you didn't believe it was real. So like, how do you get depressed or sad, or like when you think that like possibilities for you are really less, that's the guess I'm coming at. So when your possibilities in the world are really restricted, more and more narrow, you feel trapped, and you get really frustrated. So if somebody puts you through this experience that you think is real, and it's kind of very different, like it's a arena of all the potential, and you have never experienced it before. So one thing I think it can do is open up your mind to like new possibilities, new things, so that when you go back into the real world, right? That's one thing. Another thing would be those terrorists, right? They believe there is a real world out there somewhere, where you will get whatever number of virgins or what have you, and you then in this real world, these guys are like superheroes of courage, because they fly planes into buildings and they blow themselves up. I couldn't do that, so maybe it gives you a certain confidence in dealing with the real world when you have this delusion that that world is the real world. I'm just guessing.
But he seems to describe it as you're better at, he calls it optimizing your capacity to make sense. So what he seems to be saying is, because you have this experience, it helps you situate yourself in everything else. So it's not and I think in the next lecture he's going to talk more about the mystical experience, but it's not about, from what I've gathered so far, about what the content of the experience is and whether that's quote unquote real. It's how it helps you analyze everything else.
I see.
Okay,
so I can that can make a lot of sense. Like in like what you brought in with the example of like multiple types of religion. So for somebody that is, let's say, more agreeable in nature, for them to have some sort of experience that allows them to be more stubborn or more forthright with themselves, this will give them a greater ability to act within the world. You could do that same thing, but it's a disagreeable person, and like have some sort of experience that's telling them how, by being a little bit more charitable towards other people and actually considering their feelings and things like that with how you interact with them. This also gives you a better way of understanding and interacting with the world. Those two experiences that they would have would probably be extremely different from each other, like the experiences of that causes them to change. And so your point, I think, is that like the experience itself doesn't have to have some sort of like real, I don't know, an ontology to it.
External ontology, call it.
Right. All it needs is something that is capable of changing the person themselves and how they like their framework for how they experience the world.
That's what I think he's saying. That's what I think he's getting at.
And I think, that's probably quite right, because that's how he seems to go about for a lot of these types of things. So like he brings in, like in other discussions, he talks about free will, and he gives a good example of like, I'm not exactly sure why people even want free will, or I'm not even sure like what it is about free will that people would want it. I would much rather be always in line with the true, the good, and the beautiful for every action that I do, without having like the ability to go against that in some way. That's his way, I think, of reframing the problem in such a way that allows us to consider it, like instead of considering compatibilism or determinism as a negative, but rather reframing it so that we can actually consider it in a different light.
Well, and you and I have had a conversation where I've explained which we won't get into now, but my ideas on free will are not quite like his, but I think there's no practical difference between having it or not having it. And that's probably, and I recognize that's my way of reconciling the problem. And I think some people, I think people have a misunderstanding of it, so that they think their view of free will can affect their behavior because they're thinking about it wrong. But I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but we should do that on street at some point.
Right. Okay, so there's the other aspect, though, that I want to bring in, that Vervake, forget which lecture it is, it might be like probably like 2 or 3, somewhere in there, where he brings in the concept he has of bullshitting, where he talks about this in regards to the sophists. So I think that's the Socrates episode, where Socrates was upset with the sophists because the sophists were using their ability to persuade just so that they could achieve what they wanted or what they were paid to do. And they did that by making the mark, I guess you could say, or the person that's being targeted or persuaded, to make them no longer care about what was real or not. And I don't know if I can put it into an example exactly. But that's kind of like what the
Cypher.
Right. Yeah, that is a good example. So for Cypher himself, he didn't care that he was living within a delusion of his own creation.
Or not even of his own creation, of the Matrix, right? So
I think the arrangement was.
What were his conditions, though?
Yeah, he had to be rich, and
his conditions were a world of his making.
Mm-hmm.
See, he's still not giving it back to him, and so there's an element of that which is, I guess, illusory or maybe underhanded or sneaky, perhaps, because it's being presented as him going back into the Matrix, but in his own mind, he's not going back into the Matrix. He's going back into his own mind, right? He's built a fantasy of what he wants. It's what he wants, not what the Matrix wants. And that's his only condition. His sole condition for moving back into the Matrix is not moving back into the Matrix. It's moving into this other thing that he's imagining for himself. He's just believing the robots when they say, we're going to put you back in the Matrix. He's connecting that external thing, but he's really attempting to not go back down, but to go back up to a higher dimension, which is his reimagining of what that thing was.
Well, but it's not I get stuck in the saying of a higher level of consciousness or a higher dimension, because what it is a different experience that has a better psychological effect, right? What does it mean by higher?
So I mean, that's a good point, but it's broader, larger, more space, more rules, more complexity. Again, when you're dealing with your local real knowledge, it's all contained within your mind. But those elements of factual information or rational analysis in this mind, as well as yours, again, going back to Vervake's methods for determining reality, lends the idea that it's not just in my own head, right? So we're broadening.
Right.
Like say we hit our head and we fall into a deep coma. And for the rest of our lives, we're on a respirator in the outside world. But in the inside world, we have the most pleasant experience imaginable. And for as long as we're connected to that respirator, it is just a wonderful experience. You have no knowledge of the outside world, but it's amazing. Like, is that a bad thing? Like that's an existence where for your whole rest of your existence, you're greatly happy. Like, would we? Now, none of it's.
Right. So you're asking that question for us to answer it. Do you know what we'd have to do?
Be in the guy's head, but
no, I mean just you and I, like going through this conversation. If I were to try to answer that, what process would I go through?
We'd have to analyze what is good, what's our goals.
I'm going to start pulling in from other frameworks and other concepts and other ideas and other relevance factors. I'm going to start pulling in and say, all right, well, wait a minute, can someone unplug him at any point? I'm going to start asking questions about the world outside his mind.
Let's say they can, but for as long as he's plugged in, for as long as he's alive, every second of his life, his experience is going to be wonderful.
Yeah. So what you're doing right there is you're making a real statement about the world outside of him. You're giving it to me as a hypothetical, but you're initiating it as an unchangeable element. The realist element of the scenario is that he can't change and that it's going to stay that way. That's what you just told me.
Sure.
So you've defined the real scenario by that which persists.
No control over him being in this wonderful state. He's going to be in this wonderful state until he dies a natural death or someone unplugs him. And well, then it's still natural.
Right. So what you just did was you initiated the reality of that description itself by appealing to its persistence.
Well, I'd ask also too, like, what are we comparing this situation to? So would it be better for somebody to enter into a coma voluntarily where they do have this positive experiences until somebody unplugs them or they die naturally? Or is it, this is a natural occurrence that we can't wake them up. We could either kill him or leave him there. Then yeah, fine, leave him there. But if it's something like we could wake him up, but it would cause him to leave his positive state of eternal happiness, but he has a wife and children, and they're going to be missing their father if he's left in a coma all this time. So like, there's a lot more, like we have to, you can't, I don't know, at least for myself, I can't conceive of a good state or a negative state unless I'm comparing it to its potential alternatives.
Well, yeah, but we could say that he's from his perspective, it's pure bliss, and from the outside perspective, yeah, it caused a lot of trouble. But you could say, yeah, but is it selfish then for them to stop his bliss? But I'm also just thinking about it in terms of just, let's see if we, for a minute, take away all the externalities and just focus on, he has no free will, but he's in a state of absolute bliss for X number of years, and it's just wonderful. And if you woke him up and asked him, he would say, man, that was the best experience ever. And then he dies and it stops. I mean, our instinct is, well, there's something wrong with that. But if our goal in life is, I mean, I always talk about survive, thrive, and be happy. And our goal at the end, I think, is to achieve happiness, well-being, eudaimonia, however you say it. You want that sense of well-being. If this guy with no free will, you would probably say his internal, like, our well-being can only be described by our internal experience. If we didn't have an internal experience, there's no well-being. It's just different organizations of molecules, right? So
I mean, we have no access to the internal states of animals, but we definitely make judgments about their states of well-being.
Right. No, but if they didn't have an internal state, if they weren't conscious, like, I don't feel bad about smashing my computer because I think it's not conscious, right? But
I feel Basilisk is coming for you, man.
Well, no, let's say my old computer that's obsolete, and it's because I've bought the new one. But no, but I'll feel bad about just arbitrarily smashing the head of an animal. I mean, we kill them to eat them, but we seem, most people I think seem to think it's bad to just destroy it. It's because they have a conscious experience. Like, I feel less bad about say squashing a bug who may have very limited conscious experience and something's not necessarily being lost. But I would think from the perspective of this guy, he's having the best of all worlds in a way. He's having an amazing experience for his life. He's missing out on other experiences, which could also be good.
Yeah, so that's true. That's true as long as you isolate it, right? If I start asking any other questions outside of the scenario you just presented, in other words, if I start asking relevance questions for the outside world or the, in fact, scenario which you're building, it's going to fall to pieces. Because what you're doing is you're isolating, you're making a little virtual world. You're saying, here is a world where a man can be happy plugged in for the rest of his life. That's the way that world exists. And that's the same thing as me saying, here's the universe, and this is the way things exist.
But we can bring it to this modal confusion. And in a way, I think it is.
Well, okay. So, but I think there are common elements across those two virtual worlds and the real world, because in reality, we are living in the virtual worlds that we're building in our mind, right? Mm-hmm. So the same element that we use to determine in the virtual world, the same element there we use to determine what's real in the real world. And I think that is moving over to the Piagetian equilibration, okay? So first you localize the games in your head, and if they work, you start to localize it with the person next to you. As a child, you learn to play with another playmate.
Right, but you're talking about if they work, and that's, I think, the key to what he's talking about. The benefit, as he describes, is alleviating the existential stress. Now, that is a truth. We talked about different modes of truth. Their truth is more, I forget, there's a word for it. I know Peterson likes this version of truth, of what works. It's that regardless of whatever truth of the story you tell yourself, if it relieves that existential stress, we might say it's a good thing. Now, maybe it makes you not care about things you should care about. Then maybe there's downsides to it. You know. But
so what works and for how long? What works and for how long does it work?
Yeah, right. And that's something we also have to deeply consider is like we're getting a lot of these lectures from a psychologist's perspective. We're not getting it from an engineer's perspective or anything like. Well, I suppose engineer, like a psychologist, is an engineer towards positive states of well-being for mental creatures or mental humans, things like that. I did want to bring up. Where was I going with it? Sorry.
Are you changing the topic?
No. It's part of the same topic with cipher. So we can think of it like this, where we have the desire to have our model, like our description of like, I want to know what's real and I don't want to know what's not real. I want to know as many true things and as few false things as possible, as Matt Dillahunty would say. You can conceive of how, like for Cypher in the Matrix, he's creating a reality in which his model for it is entirely equal to the reality itself. So like,
no, it's better.
Well, it's like a perfect match between his desired framework or his model of reality and the reality that he experiences.
Yeah, he's attempting to enact his utopia, right?
Right.
By petition to a higher power.
Now, and then you can think about like, what's the difference then for, say, Neo, who's outside the Matrix and has maybe a lesser degree of understanding for the world. Like the outside the Matrix, the world does not correspond with how we wish it to be, or how our models for it might be. Like if I have this expectation, so that's one way we can compare models. Like if Neo has the expectation that what's her name, the
Trinity
Oracle. No, I was thinking, or that Oracle would stay alive. Actually, no, Oracle only exists inside the Matrix. Sorry. Okay, so for outside the Matrix, who dies outside the Matrix?
The little wait, who dies outside the Matrix?
Yeah, outside the Matrix. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. If for Neo, who's outside the Matrix, he has this model of reality that does not correspond with how the results. Is he living a more true life than Cypher, who exists within the Matrix, and all of his expectations for how reality will go play out exactly as he expects it to?
But also, who has more existential stress? Like the guy in the Matrix, maybe just calm and happy and just living like where Neo is having to figure all this stuff out. We have the real world example of the role of religion and death, say, or when horrible things happen, someone dies and you're like, oh my God, I'm not going to see this person again. Why did this horrible thing happen? And some people have religion where they say, well, there's a plan. It's part of God's plan. And that, I think, resolves for them that modal confusion. They can then place this death that seemed arbitrary and terrible in this greater context and makes them feel better. Now, I don't believe that myself, but again, does it matter if it's actually true, if it makes them feel better? I'm not answering the question here. I'm legitimately asking because my instinct is the same as yours. I always want to know the truth, but sometimes I question that. Like, why do I always want to know the truth? I know sometimes it doesn't make me happy to be so skeptical. I think we need people who do this. A lot of people don't, but I don't think it necessarily leads to happiness per se. I think it does some good stuff, but maybe not relieving existential.
So God is the thing which is true in all possible worlds. It is the thing which is most consistent throughout all time and throughout all eternity.
I have a problem with that because then we're getting redefining.
What do you mean by?
I know you got a problem with it. I know you do.
I mean, I think it causes confusion by using a different definition of God, because because
like I kind of think about it like something's true as like a propositional statement or propositional knowledge. Like this is either true or false.
Mm-hmm.
So if your
existence of a God however that is defined usually. So the maximal being in any given world. And we can define that. Look, this is pulling slightly from Gödel's own conception of his proof of God, which has to do with modal logic. And
the one thing, though, that I don't know, that's kind of
the real thing
rubbed me the wrong way is that it seems like it's not a category error, but it's like a false equivalency between the maximal being in a world without creatures in it and a maximal being in a world with creatures in it. So the maximal being in a world without creatures would just be like the sun, because it has the greatest amount of mass. The maximal being in a...
You say that as though that's obvious. You just defined it that way.
Well, I mean, that's...
And
well, how are we meaning maximal being then?
What's a being?
Well, okay, so it's how you define it. That's exactly how it is. So what you just did was define it based on a scale of mass, and the maximum is amount of mass. Or
well, I mean, we can get it. I mean, this is a huge conversation on its own, right?
Okay, right. But I'm pointing out that in any given system ever, period, it doesn't matter what scenario you give me right now, try it. I can develop within that system something which is a maximal aspect of it. Okay, and that's it's a very difficult concept to even begin to wrap your head around, let's say, because we are only concerned ordinarily with these direct, real approximations of what we consider these logical constructs. But this is a real concept. It's a real idea, right? So if I have a box with a button in it, there is a behavior implied in that box by the very structure of the box itself, by the structure of the universe itself. It has a behavior implied in it, right? And you can begin making statements about reality based on all of these different constructions. So I can say that within that box, right, you have press the button or not press the button, right? And if you don't press the button, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. So there is a clear distinction between the state of not press the button and nothing happens, and the state of press the button and a donut comes in. Because the description of donut coming in is a completely new phenomenon which alters the state of that prior description. And by altering it, by adding something in, by describing its processes and more features, it's becoming more, right? This process of becoming more is what we're talking about.
Because that includes the previous
your donut example. Like you could say, okay, if he realizes that he's eating people, that changes it. But then he has to go another thought and saying, well, you know what? I'm stuck in this box. If I don't eat these donuts, I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And and then it changes again. But this is back to what I'm getting at. Like resolving, we can resolve, say, just on the experience of having someone close to us die. We can resolve that modal confusion in a few different ways. We can resolve it in terms of believing there's a purpose and it's God's plan. We can resolve it in secular ways of, they had a good life. They lived their life. They're not there anymore, but I had my experiences with them. There are different ways we can resolve this modal confusion. So the same result, we get to the state of the well-being of not suffering anymore from this loss, but through very different stories that we tell ourselves. And so, and can we say that, like, they both can't be true? Let's just say we have two different stories we tell ourselves, and they're conflicting, so they both can't be true, but we reach the same result.
They both achieve that same existential.
All right. So here's an important element that needs to be brought up now. And okay. So let's say there are two people in the room now with the button and the donut, and
I can eat the other guy. I can kill him. No.
Okay. But I press the button and I eat the donut, and I call it eating a donut. John is in the room with me, and he sees me eat the donut, and he says, "Whoa, you just ate people!" Right? And I'm like, "No, I just ate a donut. The word is donut." And you say, no, the word is people. That's a people. Now we're going to have an argument, right? Like, no, this is the shape of a donut. It's a torus, right? There's sprinkles on top. I don't know, get glazing. But we'll argue about that. And essentially what we're arguing over is what label to give it, right? Because I don't even know about the existence of this hypothetical stuff yet. So we're arguing about labels at this point, and this is the referent. This is the thing that we're using to refer to some aspect of reality. But what is different is not the object itself, right? It's and not even the compositional quality. Those aren't changing. What is different is the referent, the word that we're using to attach to it. Now, once we open the box, we discover that John's word has much more meaning than mine, right? So which element of truth are we talking about here? And this has to do with the superficial versus deep alteration I wanted to make to that graph versus, in terms of transparency and opaqueness. But I think it functions in the same way.
But I think as I'm thinking, like, I think you're right about bringing in the externalities, and I think what we have to say is this: okay, we've resolved. Say we have these two different stories, and we resolve. We resolve the modal confusion in these different ways, but there may be externalities, there may be other effects of resolving this confusion in one way versus the other, and there may be a package of downsides that come with resolving this one way versus another. But again, the focus there is still not on truth. The focus is on what has the least amount of harm. So sort of a practical, does it work? Which works best? Which causes the most amount of, of positive or negative effects? But again, we're getting further away from truth as the core. And again, I have this instinct, I have this impulse, the same as you, to want, like Matt Dillahunty, I'd rather know what's true than just what feels good. But
all right, but so this has to do with labels and actions. Okay,
but is it just labels and actions? I think it's deeper than labels and actions. It's
well,
like we can label, we can go long form and describe.
When I say labels, you can take it out as far as you want. A whole book is a label if you want it to be that way. Okay, it's a label of the contents of the author's mind.
But are you talking about, again, going back and forth between the features and the framework?
Yes, that's it right there. So context and content, agent and landscape. All of these are exactly the same stuff. Okay, and that is right hemisphere, left hemisphere. What am I talking about, and what can it do? What is the thing described, and how is it related to its world? Those are the two manners in which we deal with everything. Okay, so arguing over about whether it's a donut or a people is one element of the left hemisphere. What is it called?
The answer is donut and people. It's just different ways of the answer is
you're resolving the conversation inside the box. I'm not worried about that. I'm just saying our argument itself is about what to call it, right? But whether or not,
I know it's not about just what to call it.
Well, okay, but I could say donut in my mind and be referring to people still. That's a synonym versus an antonym, right? I'm bringing that up before. So that the point is that you can have different internal states referring to the same external state, right? Or you can have the same internal states referring to different external states, and then you can talk about how you are to engage in those processes. Right.
But often when we're talking about what's real, we're talking about what is the actual external state, right? We may be wrong about like there either is a God or there's no God. So if you got two people, one believes there is a God, one believes there's not a God, they can't both be right, but they're both interacting with the same world.
There either is a cat or there isn't a cat, a la Schrodinger.
Or if from within the box, like say nobody ever opened it up, or somebody had a vision of what was happening outside the box, the actual knowledge of where that donut comes from is ingraspable. And so the truth behind it is something that we cannot attain. And so maybe in that situation, all we have is kind of like the externalities. But of course, the externalities for that situation are external to the box.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if they're external, if it is opaque, if the walls are opaque and you have no access to it, what are you going to do exactly? But if you had a room of, it's got 100 people in it, and every time you press the button, a giant arm comes out first, you know, like grabs one of the people and there's and it just yanks him out of the room. And then you hear like, and then the donut pops out, and you go, "Oh, wait a minute!" Right? And every time you press that button, the arm goes out and grabs another person. You after 10 people, you're like, "Oh, these donuts don't taste so good anymore." Right? There's an internal element that's initiating some salience, some meaning making.
Right, and I think like it's good to consider the like. Okay, so yes, there is for somebody that say it's a translucent box, you get to see the exact process between hitting the button, the deaths of 10 people, and the donut that you achieve, versus somebody within a opaque box. There is a clear distinction there between the, I guess, moral culpability of the person pressing the button, at least for my impression, even though it had the exact same consequences.
What is it? Like I had eggs for breakfast. Now I didn't see the farm where maybe these eggs are in tiny cages, spending their these hens are in tiny cages, trapped in versus like a free range farm. I don't have access to any of that, and I like to not think about it, but because I like eggs, I like meat, but it's one area where I probably think I'm being immoral, but I do it anyway, because I'm a picky eater. But we have a real life
if you're
box.
being immoral and I turn upside down, does that make you immoral?
yeah, too much. You're back to upside down.
You're trying to get our attention.
It's a bug in Samsung.
Well, like think about veal. Like I love veal. My mom makes veal cutlet, and it's so good. But the way they get veal is by chaining baby calves, to like keeping them emaciated, and they basically starve them, and it ends up tasting really good. And I feel very guilty when I eat it. I try not to go to my way to eat it because of that. But knowing it or not knowing it makes a big difference in how I enjoy that food. But knowing the truth creates.
That's so good. That's so good because you know the scene. You know the scene, right?
Yeah, in the Matrix when Cypher is eating the steak.
Right, and he said, "Yeah, you know
that it is not a real steak; it's just sensory experiences for his consciousness."
But again, we have to think like this. We get back to like, what is our goal? And like is at the end of the day our goal to be happy? Is our goal is that the I say happy but well-being to not have this existential dread, to be satisfied with life? And what is our goal? And
our goal, Pod, is to keep opening the boxes.
That's the thing. We have many divergent goals between us as people, and we also have many.
If you're talking to me and you're an intelligent actor, which I believe you are, John, that's your goal, is to open boxes. That's what intelligence seems to do. See, like this is a common element across it, and this is a deeper question, and I'm not trying to bring that argument up now, but that's the best definition of intelligence, is that thing which keeps opening boxes and trying to figure out what the most efficient use of resources is within that box.
But we have to be aware that maybe opening the box is going to cause a whole lot of existential stress.
And I just don't think we can stop that aspect of it.
I agree, and that's what I'm saying. I have the same instinct. I want to know. I like the Matt Dillahunty quote is mine. Like personally, I want to know what's true, but but I don't think it necessarily makes me happy. And which means like if somebody could just spend their life having, let's just say you have somebody who just stayed stoned all the time and they didn't live that long. They said, I'm going to take a year. I'm going to save up enough food where I can live for a year on my stores, and I'm going to stay stoned the entire time on hallucinogenics. I'm going to have a year where I slowly starve to death, having fantastic experiences, and then die at the end of that. Like
Seattle.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting. Like you think, okay, this is a guy. You think, okay, he's letting himself die. He's going to have a short life, but he's going to have a year where he has the most amazing experiences ever.
Our instinct have a very strange definition of stone free.
Sounds similar to the person that was smoking their cigarettes. Like they rely upon their cigarettes to make them happy, and then that's the thing that kills them. I mean,
well, you can say like, look, the professional athlete. I for what I understand, professional athletes have like 4 or 5 amazing years, and then the rest of their life they spend in pain, because they've destroyed their body through putting it through all this abuse. Now, most of them would probably say, you know what, I'm suffering for another 50 years, but to have those 5 years of being at the top of the world was worth it because I had that experience.
Well, you know, if you branch outside of human beings, you get really weird scenarios, okay, where octopi have kids that swarm them and eat them, right? So weird stuff like that. There are all sorts of elements of the game of life that are not established on this notion that happiness is the thing which should persist. It's something deeper than that, and it has more to do with whether or not the patterns themselves persist.
I'm using happiness, but I know it's a bad word. I think eudaimonia is probably a better word, or well-being is a better word. Happiness is like a temporary feeling, but I'm talking about like a sense of.
Well, okay, right. But if I saw a human being have children and then, you know, assemble some surgical wear next to them and just kind of die and let the kids come out, and I would say, whoa, that's not well-being. That's not okay at all. We should not be acting.
And what's their conscious experience? Like a fruit fly that lives a few hours, has a very short life.
Right.
Like you would say, okay, they've only had a few hours of life. I don't know what kind of internal experience they have. They probably have some internal experience, probably very minimal. You know,
I would say, gosh, they keep doing it. There must be something going on there, right? That's what I would say. It keeps happening. Why does it keep happening?
This is where we have these instincts to procreate, right? You know, where that comes in. Mm-hmm. But I think as humans, we go beyond. Like I say, survive, thrive, and be happy. Survive. You know, we have base instincts to procreate, but we want to do more as humans. We want to do more than just procreate and pass on our genes, and we want to do more than just live. We don't want to just live. We don't want to just live alive. Most animals live at subsistence levels. Like they're out in the forest. An animal in the forest, you would think, has a pretty crummy life. They're mostly starving. You know, and they're hunting. They're wet. They're cold. They're hungry. But they do it. They do it until they die. Humans like to go beyond that. We want to get to a level of comfort where we're not having to just barely be alive all the time, and then we want to get on to well-being. And
is that true though?
Because I don't think that's true. Yeah.
A lot of people like having a place of comfort within themselves. They lose their sense of meaning for a lot of ways because they're not actively involved with the, I don't know, like the pleasure of their tribe or things like that. Like they're not feeling important because they're living off the subsistence of the land.
Well, so the landscape is dynamic.
No, but if you don't have food, shelter, clothing, like, you know, warmth, whatever, if you don't have those basics, you can't even think about any of the other stuff. You're just focused on getting that next meal. You're just focused about getting out of the elements. You're just focused on not freezing to death if you live in a cold climate.
When you say other stuff, what other stuff are you referring to?
Like anything, like, you know, well-being, like, you know, being. You
mean like the 3,000-year conversation that we've all been having in the West about we should eat and when we should eat it and why we should eat it?
No, I mean, like, okay, most of us, like, we're here and we're in heated house, or right now I'm in a house. I'm sitting inside an air conditioner that's cooling me down. It's making me comfortable, and because of all that, we, the four of us, are sitting here having a conversation because we are not at a subsistence level. And I think we would say what we're doing is this is what I would call thriving, that we're beyond near scourging for food. We're not right out there hunting down our next meal. We're not trying to find our next, but, you know, we can do all of this because we're thriving, because we've gone beyond subsistence.
I'm afraid you're importing far more beneficial state to me than I can state I have. I'm thriving in certain regions of my brain, but other elements of my life are not thriving, right? And I think
but you're still beyond me. Your whole life is not just like an animal's life. Is the vast majority of his time is spent looking for food and avoiding being killed, right? That's not.
Nope. I mean, you just described described a couple of different animals, right? And maybe whole classes of animals. In fact, what you're describing perhaps is we can start to describe certain parts of the way that the animal kingdom works. So like your K versus R selection, the manner in which you reproduce, right? So
I think, and the more evolved, the more complex the brain, the more they involve, like some animals involve in play, but right. So I'm not, but I'm saying the more intelligence you have, the more you're able to go beyond just like a fruit fly is probably not doing much more than finding food and screwing, right? Like that's sort of their lives. They're probably not doing much more beyond that.
What is a bear doing when it hibernates all through winter? You think he's dreaming? You think he's dreaming of
I don't know, probably
finding honey?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
You think he's dreaming of eating honey or talking to hey boo boo?
Well, you know what? They must be able to. I guess they wouldn't want to do it with a bear, but they must be able to hook up. They can tell when a human's dreaming. They must be able to hook up animals and see if.
Oh yeah, like you can assume that dogs dream because like their legs move. They're chasing rabbits.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably for bears too. They probably have some.
I didn't want to overgeneralize to say animals never go beyond that, but again, if an animal is starving, they're probably not going to be. I'm talking about the general that you need to have each level done before you can get to the next.
Well, okay, so I guess my point is, and let's say, so you follow the traditional Darwinian description of evolution, right? So
I mean, it's more complicated. I mean, it's moved on a lot.
But that basic framework, single cellular, simple life evolving over time into more complex organisms over time.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So why? Why insects, millions of babies, lives for just a few days? Why moths with no mouths versus bear that sleeps all winter?
I mean, why are? Why or
yeah.
How?
So I mean, we know that various levels of intelligence exist across multiple different animal kingdoms, right? So parrots are relatively intelligent, bears,
dolphins,
monkeys, dogs, dolphins, whatever, right? The hierarchies of intelligence based on their capacity to interact with the environment and solve problems that we give them, right? Why? What's the difference? If the game of life is nature trying to find these different strategies and what's more effective throughout time, what is in fact different between the behaviors and structural functional organization of a bear versus that of a human or a fruit fly? How did those develop over time?
Again, I don't think of the game of life, of evolution as directional. So I don't think it has a point. What it has is that there are certain things again that sort of work, certain processes that tend to propagate themselves. And
do you think that people are goal directed?
Yes, but evolution I don't think is goal directed. So
if people are goal directed and we are a product of evolution, where did that come from?
Well, I mean, I think we like our goals are cognitive processes. It's information processing.
But you are describing it as goal directed, object directed. Like you like when you're hungry, when we finish this and you go and get something to eat, you're going to picture. Well, maybe not. You're not going to picture. You're gonna know where to go get food, and you're gonna go right to it. Goal directed.
Sure. But and animals have that too. When they're hungry, they
have that too. And I think they're all goal directed. I think life is goal directed. I think it has direction.
But, yes, but evolution is not like you could break down when we say evolution, and we're using a word to denote a whole bunch of things that are going on. Really, what like again, natural selection. People think things evolve to survive, but really what it is only things that survive pass on their genes. The things that don't survive don't pass on their genes, right? So it's not that we evolve.
That depends on when the detrimental effect is occurring, either pre-reproduction or after.
Right, but I'm saying it's not a goal-oriented process. It's that if something dies for whatever reason, it's not.
Do you consider reproduction a goal?
Well, it depends. Like,
what would you consider the game of life then? That's curious.
Well, again, it depends how we're talking about it. Like, we can talk about it as a game.
Yeah. I mean, to me, so I'll just give you my description. It seems like to me, just from a very kind of pure secular perspective, the game of life is to keep playing the game of life, no matter how weird it is, no matter how strange it is that there is a wasp that has a symbiotic relationship with figs. You should go look that up, by the way, the fig wasp. Please, just go watch a documentary on that sometime. No matter how strange it is that exists, the game of life should just keep going, right? That seems to be the game of life. Just keep it going.
I think we all have these. We have these instincts, right? We all, at least humans, most of us, I think, have the instinct to keep going, right? And we can presume animals have that to some extent too. Like, I don't know if a fruit fly knows why it mates. I don't know if it has any conception of what it's doing. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know if they've studied it and figured out, do animals know what they're doing when they're mating?
If it developed sufficient intelligence to determine that, I think it would sound very much like human beings.
Yeah, I think we're on a continuum. I mean, like it's amazing. You ever look at zoomed up photos of bacteria, and like you don't really like they have little paws, little hands. Like you don't even think about
the flagella.
No, not even the flagella. There's one. There's one that's often shown. I don't know. It's like looks like a little piggy.
Oh, you're talking about the tardigrade then.
Yeah, and like you look at it, and these are tiny little things.
I know that you said piggy.
yeah, that's how they're known. I've seen pictures of it.
But it's called water bear.
Like, water bear. Like so many of the aspects of big, huge animals are in that tiny little thing, right? Yeah. Like hands and arms and hands and snouts, and like they develop very early in the evolutionary cycle.
Well, I mean, so if you go, the tardigrade is still fairly large compared to a bacterium, although there are some fairly large bacteria. But if you go even further and you look down at the machinery occurring in bacteria, the flagella itself is a little rotary. Yeah. It's a rotary motor.
Yeah, the flagella is amazing when you look at it. You know what's going on.
Yeah. So, but there's something about the game of life which utilizes intelligence for whatever particular environment it happens to be in to solve the problem of organizing resources so that the game of life can keep playing. That it doesn't matter where the intelligence exists. It's either in a fruit fly or a human being. It's the singular game it seems to be trying to do is structure the local region as best you can to survive.
No, but except evolution is often like humans have a lot more intelligence, so we can actually change our environments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of and you know, beavers, for example, can change their environments, and animals that dig can change their environments. So other animals may not have that capacity, just have to adapt to the environment. And the ones that don't adapt will die, and the ones that do adapt will keep on going. But
mm-hmm.
you know,
so in other words, mosquitoes have no capacity to fight DDT directly, right? They can't do battle with us at the biological warfare level. They can adapt, right?
But I think this is where agency comes in. That we think of agents we think of as beings that are not just trapped by their environment, but they can consciously make decisions that change it. And once you have
boxes.
Right. But then you have to say, okay, but this is the thing. Why? Okay, we can use our agency in a whole lot of different ways. So I think once you have agency, I think again, humans, we have. Look, I have 3 children. I don't want any more children. My goals in life are not just to keep on propagating my genes as much as possible. You know, like my goal. I have my kids. That's great. But that's a lot of my goals are with my kids and raising them.
Yeah, now it's to rear them. Yeah.
Right, but my goal is not to pass on as many of my genes as possible, right? So I mean, we have to talk about. There's 2 different ways we can talk about survival. When I talk about survival, in terms of the moral our moral goals, I'm not really talking about passing on our genes. I'm talking about keeping ourselves alive, right? Like
Yeah. Okay. So right, but look, so remember the K versus R selection types. What you're doing there is you're taking the agency or the determinant, and you're playing with the ratio there. So The determinant for the survival of your very small number of offspring is localized within the agency of pod. Pod is the one who does the work to make the children go forward through time. In the opposite, where you just have 1,000 babies, 10 million babies, you're not doing any work to determine their future success individually as a subject. It is the environment which.
But I could have no. But let's see. I could have no babies. Let's just say.
I'm just pointing out. I'm pointing out an interesting element there, which is.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Meaningful, I think.
No, I feel like you guys have moved like so far away. I've been trying to figure out.
No, I want to bring it back. This is where I want to bring it back. Is where we were talking about the like. I think our goal, and this is where we get back to like what our goals are. Our goals are more than just surviving. We want to do something with our survival. Our goal is to first survive because we can't do. We have no. If we don't survive, we can't accomplish any other goals. You know, we can't do anything if we're not alive, right? So survival is the bare minimum. But then we have to decide, once we've got survival down, we have to decide what to do with ourselves. And I think most of us want to do more than just survive, but just stay alive. We want to do way more than that. We want to have well-being.
Well, yeah. So it's not just survive. It's to keep playing the game of life. And the game of life looks.
You can play the game of life and be absolutely miserable.
I know, but that's what I mean. So the game of life looks different depending on what your complexity level is, right? And what your agency level is. So the agency for a mosquito mother in terms of rearing her young, it's almost non-existent, right? The only responsibility they have is suck some blood, find a mate, dump it in the water, die. That's it. Yours is 20 years longer if you overlap them.
No, but
ingrained agential behavior.
I don't want to just rear my kids. I do want to rear my kids, and I want them to be happy and all that. But I also want to be happy myself. I also want to have well-being myself.
Yeah, but you find that through the action of helping to rear them, right?
Yes, but it's not the only thing. My goal. So what I'm saying is, so when we're bringing it back to we're bringing it back to this, like what Vervake's talking about with, resolving this existential angst and resolving this modal confusion, that goes way beyond rearing your kids. Like for example, I have very little modal confusion about my role as a father in terms of knowing, in terms of my places, my responsibilities to raise these kids. I may have modal angst if I'm doing a good job or not doing a good job, right? That can affect. But in terms of my agent arena, I understand my agent, my role as a father, and my role is to raise them. And you go further into how you raise them in the best way. Mm-hmm. But the well-being he's talking about goes way beyond parental raising, right? Like we can't limit it.
The well-being of who is talking about?
That Vervake's talking about goes way beyond just like my role as a father is one modal arrangement that I have to concern about in my life, but I have so many others, right? And and frankly, the ones that cause me anxiety often are not my father roles. Although sometimes if I feel like you have angst of whether you've done a good job or not, but I think it's a little bit different.
Well, it depends on what's causing it, right? So whether or not you're confused about it. But yeah, so my question is touching on an important element about how we go through this process, I guess, to bring it back to even the label of insight, right? Of determining, well, a couple of different relationships that you stand into the outside world and your agential relationships to the outside world. What are you responsible for? Right? What are you actually responsible for? You press the button, you eat the donut. I'm shaking my desk, right? Are you responsible for that? When are you responsible for that? Is it when the walls are transparent? Is it when the person in the room with you is sufficiently convincing? It's people, bro. I don't believe you. All right, John, you convince me. It's people, right? Like where does that Where does that exist? That is the question: am I a good father or not? And this, there's no. I mean, I think that is the ambiguity or the discovery of the solution or the answer to that is what intelligence does. That seems to be the function of intelligence, is maneuvering within the choice space to determine the best outcome. And the best outcome seems to be keep playing the game of life. And that will differ based on whether or not you're a coal miner or pod sitting at a computer having a philosophical conversation.
But do you think that somebody who can, like, I think there are people who seem very satisfied with life who I'm pretty sure do not engage with any of this deep existential stuff. And they just sort of do their stuff. They don't think about it much. And, they have their family. Maybe they see themselves, maybe they have religion or they see, but they're not engaging in this constant truth seeking. They're just sort of living their life. They have good relationships and they die. And, you would say, hey, they had a pretty darn good life. So I don't, like, I'm just saying that just opening the box, I think our goal is to sort of use that to increase happiness, but I don't know but at midpoint along the way, I think there's a lot of unhappiness that can be caused from opening these boxes. Yep. So I think maybe the thing is we open the box because we hope it's going to lead to something better, even though we know in the short term it may cause a lot of problems for us, and we may even die before we experience the benefit.
As long as you are trying to be happy, you are most certainly not going to be because your original. I wanted to come in much before, but you guys
insert yourself. We like to talk, so just say, hey, I have something to say, and just start talking, and we'll let you go.
Even at your original problem, right, when you were talking about modal confusion and how somebody, and here is what I'm coming from. I don't know as much about philosophy and these things like Tyler and you guys do, but I'm coming from the meditation training I have had, right? So when you say somebody or somebody's mother died and that person is really sad, and in order to cope with that, you give that person narrative A or narrative B, and he might be able to better cope with that. But at the end of the day, what you are doing, you are trying to escape that situation. Something is hurting you and you are trying to escape it. So right, so what about increasing your tolerance for negative emotions? Like you have this fundamental tendency to run away from negative things that are hurting you, and then move towards the positive things that are giving you pleasure, right? But what you don't know is, as long as you are in this model, you are going to be miserable, because that's the basic Buddhist teaching. So just to give a small example, you buy yourself a new car, it gives you immense amount of pleasure and you are very happy for a day, and then there is a scratch on it, right? And then you are so mad, you want to kill the guy who did it. So the same thing brought you so much pleasure also gave you so much of suffering. Why? Because you were attached to it, right? The same thing goes for somebody's mother, right? She died, he was so attached to it, and now he's suffering. So the basic the basic teaching of the meditation is when you are doing it correctly, you'll get a good car, right? You will be happy about it, but at the same time you'll be, it's a kind of a paradox. So you'll be kind of happy about it, but you will not be attached to that happiness. You yourself will be a little separate from it. So happiness will come and it will go. And when your mother, or sorry, not your mother, but somebody's mother, when she dies, that person is sad. That sadness will come, and that person will fully experience that sadness. Like he will probably be as sad as you. Like his skin will be burning, or his head will be, I don't know, however that person experiences it. It will come and it will go. He will try to be non-reactive to it. So that's the game that the meditation practice asked me to play. and that way you can escape this duality of likes, dislikes, pleasure, and pain, and then you can have this sense of calmness no matter what the circumstance. So
well, again, just there, like I think happiness, I agree, is a bad word, because you can say, oh, it makes me happy to get that car. I think well-being is probably a better, and I think well-being is getting more at what you're talking about. Like, there's something we can think may make us happy, but it really doesn't. So we think it's going to make us happy, but we have less well-being overall. Like there's be physical and mental well-being.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but my basic point is, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
My basic point was that as long as you're trying to, from my meditation like teachings that I went through, as long as you are, as long as that mother died or what happened, as long as you are trying to find a way to escape that pain, you are going in the wrong direction. That's what my basic point is. As long as you are playing this game that I want to be happy, or I want to avoid this pain, and I want to bring in some theoretical model to make this suffering go away, as long as you're doing that, you are mistaken, as per what I learned in the meditation. If the suffering comes, let it come.
Too. I've heard that too a lot, and there's something that always strikes me as odd about that. It's like I get that, I get the intellectual thing is, by reducing attachment, you can have a better result. You can, you'll have that sense of calmness, like you were talking about. But like to say that the goal still is to have that, right? The goal is to obtain that. The goal is still to be happy, like, or to have that well-being. That's still your goal. You're just taking maybe a better route, but you're just taking a different route to get there. Like people don't, I'm going to meditate because it's going to make me miserable. Like you do it because you think there is a worthwhile goal.
Wait. Well,
that's
so
there's
an emotion of happiness.
Just the practice of meditation can trap you into this circle where you'll never get out of it. They actually address that concern that if you are doing the process of meditation for these kind of gains, then you are not doing the real meditation. So even having
escape that, like does anyone do it because they think I really don't care about any of that, or they do it because they think, you know what, I've seen other people, I've heard other people throughout history, and I know people even who have done it and it's had amazing results for them, and so they do it. Like can you really divorce yourself from that, even if you're a top meditator? Like maybe they convince themselves they are, but
I don't know. I don't think Sumit's asking that the individuals be giving up the positive benefits or the expectation of positive benefits from meditation. I don't think he's saying that. He's saying that if the intent of the individual meditating is purely to avoid that which hurts their well-being, they're doing it wrong. Right? That's what he's saying. That if that is their primary goal, to just move away from those states which feel like they're not well-being, then they're doing it wrong. That there's another element of meditation which is more important. And this is interesting because if you go with his car example, scratch on the car, right? The initial happiness was the association that this is my car. This is the current state in which it exists. There are no scratches. My car does not have scratches. Once the car becomes scratched, you say, my car doesn't have scratches. Now it is an injured car. Right? It's no longer my car. It's an injured car. It's hurt. I'm hurt because it was mine.
But think about the word well-being. Like, well-being. It's being mode, right?
But if you go into the meditative mode and look at that car and the car scratch itself, you can ask a question. Would I be okay if this car had a scratch on it? In other words, can I subtract a small element of quality from this car and still derive pleasure and happiness from it? You can ask that question. Then you can add another scratch to it. And
this is the contemplative mode.
And a fourth one, and a fifth one, and a sixth one. You can take a panel off. You can remove a car door. You can remove the wheels, right? You could start asking, would my current well-being state change if I altered elements of this vehicle, right?
And Sumit can ask, can my well-being increase if I interrupt more? Because they're always going to interrupt and talk over me, so I'm going to have to just get in there and talk.
here is the point about you saying everyone is doing it to be happy, or maybe the monks are doing it, but here is the problem with that. So if you say that meditation will make me happy, or meditation will have
well-being.
this outcome,
Let's use well-being, happiness, well-being.
Right. So well-being or whatever it is. So some people might do it because they think they'll get superpowers. Right. So as long as you have that in your mind when you are meditating, you eventually will be like, when will I reach that goal? Oh, I'm not reaching it, so I have only reached X amount of well-being, and that will interfere with your process of meditation.
Well, look, just on that, for example, this is what I sort of came up with as I was listening to Vervake's lecture, is that like he talks about these two experiences that sound amazing. The one, the pure consciousness event as you scale in, and the feeling as one with the universe as you scale out. Those sound like amazing experiences. He talked about Buddha's awakening. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm anywhere near that, but he also talked about just the benefits of meditation and contemplative practices in terms of helping us optimize our capacity to make sense, to that, we can just focus on meditation, that these exercises help us build those muscles he talked about in terms of zooming in and zooming out. So there's benefits at all levels. Now I could say, the story I would tell myself, how I would resolve the modal confusion there, I guess, is that just doing it, even on my minor level, is giving me, some benefits, even though I have some sessions where I feel bad. But at each level of meditation, I can have positive and even, negative effects, right? So we can tell ourselves stories. So I think what you're saying is, if you think, wow, meditation is useless unless I get enlightenment, you're probably going to have a not very good experience because you're focusing on the wrong things. Is that?
Okay, here's the thing. You might still, you're right, you might still get some benefits. Like you're saying, even if you're doing it with a sense of attachment, it might calm your mind down, right? And obviously it will give you all those benefits. Maybe your blood pressure will be normal, and when you come out of the meditation room, you might have a much better experience of rest of the day. So that can happen. But what I'm saying is, your main like contention there was that some really bad event has happened, and in order to make all that pain go away, should I use the explanation X of the Christians, or explanation Y of the Hindus, or what have you? And my basic point was, that's a game. As long as you are trapped in that game, you will not reach the ultimate level. So if you are doing meditation with a sense of attachment, you might still get some benefits, but that's what I was taught. So that's where I'm coming from. That
I've heard that.
This ultimate state, right, where you are one with the universe. You'll not reach that, because they say that's what Buddha was like. If you cut off his finger, he will experience that pain. His body will, but he will be like totally equanimous. And if you give him, a donut, right? He will eat it. He will enjoy all the flavor, but he himself will not be moved by that. So
Did you just say equanimous?
Yeah, that's the term they use. That's the translation of a.
No. I got it. No, it's perfect. That's a perfect word. I haven't heard that in so long, and it just popped out of your mouth there.
So let me ask you, why does any
meditation
teacher teach others? Like if they really
teach what?
Yeah.
Like they want to pass on a good experience. I mean, if there's still something.
Yeah, I think we agree with that element of it. I think Sumit's just trying to make sure that there's this attachment element that.
No, I know, but I guess what I'm questioning is, like, I've heard the same thing, and I've listened to various people talk about exactly what you're saying, and I get that instruction, but I'm wondering if anyone actually I wonder if that's actually possible. I think you can change your sort of, I can sort of, when I think I can sort of say, okay, I have anxiety, and then I can sort of try to look at it from a detached perspective where I say, that's an anxious feeling, or that's an unpleasant feeling. It's not my unpleasant feeling, it's an unpleasant feeling, or just feeling, right? So I can try to look at it less detached. But my goal is still like my goal is still, I don't want to have that. I don't want to have the suffering from that feeling. And can you really actually completely detach to the point? Like what does it mean to say I'm not attached
yes.
to the wanting to have the benefits of meditation? Like
if you were a little boy, when you were like a young little pod, I bet you had a little blankie or something.
Yeah, I did.
A toy you loved, and if somebody took it from you, you would have screamed. And I bet now you could give two shits if you ever saw that blanket. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's at the end of your bed. I don't know. But you probably, there's things from your childhood you have zero attachment to. It's gone. It's gone. You don't care.
Right? No, I get that. But can you really not be attached to wanting the benefits of meditation? Like, why would you do it if it's not to achieve the potential benefits of it?
Oh, okay. All right. So there's a difference between wanting the benefits of meditation and engaging in the thought of thinking I want the benefits of meditation in the process of meditation. So I can learn how to dribble a basketball, and I can do that for like 10 hours. And then I can dribble while I walk, and I can think about walking. But if I start to think about dribbling, it's suddenly a different thing. And that's true again for the tapping that we were doing earlier, exercise. All of these associations change. But
yeah, no, it's
the desire itself. Let's say you're building like a little, you're building an expectation, okay, of some kind, that there is a result of some kind at the end, which will be positive and beneficial. Right. You can initiate that and then kind of forget about it and let it run on its own, so to speak, and then just put sense data into it and see what happens. Or you can focus on that one, like a mantra. You can repeat it over and over and over again. I need to find sense. I need to find sense. I need to find sense. And if that's your mantra, you're not going to find sense, right?
Well, see,
I think that's the point.
Like a meditative approach, a mindfulness approach to somebody dying would be what? Would be sort of focusing inward, what's happened.
Yeah. So it's funny that you came up with that, because that, in fact, is that's the limit case for the little boy pod losing his blankie, right? The limit case is it's never coming back. And you've done that with your blanket. And I think people do that with human beings too. In fact, they kill each other. Right. So
like Sumit was saying, if your goal is to not have the suffering, you're on the wrong track. But I mean, the goal of becoming equanimous is also to not have that suffering, right? Because if you're in a state of equanimity, you're not suffering. Now, you may also not be experiencing the bliss that you can get. I mean, the fact is, most people who meditate, I think part of their goal is to achieve that, like those experiences that Vervake was talking about, right? And that enlightenment, like enlightenment is an experience. And from what I've been told, it's an amazing experience, right? If it wasn't amazing, it probably wouldn't be what people wouldn't want it. People wouldn't try to get it. It's because it's a good experience that because of the positive effect.
No, I think it sounds like you guys 100% agree on that element of it.
Well, I'm trying to.
Yeah, actually, you ask a very good question, and frankly, it's the one that I don't have a complete answer to, and it itself is a paradox. I do remember the teacher teaching that how having the attachment to the process of meditation will lead to issues, because relationship with meditation that you have with pretty much other things in your life. If things go your way, you are like, oh, I'm making progress. And if you are not getting the outcome that you actually had hoped, you'll be like, oh, today meditation was bad. You'll say that. So as long as you are in that frame of mind, you are doing something and you might get some benefit of it, but you haven't really reached that level, because you are creating the same toxic relationship with meditation that you had with other things that led to a lot of pain. So in the end, having attachment with that will lead to suffering. There is no doubt about it. As per the teaching, right? So how do you detach yourself with that? Because that's the first thing they told me. I actually went there to why I went there. I was really having a terrible time, at my workplace, and I was like, I really need to ramp up my game. I need to be more productive. So what can I do? And somebody said,
Right.
"Oh, go and do it meditation retreat for 10 days." And I was like, "Awesome! I'm going to go there. I'm going
You
to
get there, they tell you that's the worst reason to come here, right?
On the first day, they said, if you came here looking for some kind of productivity gains, they have picked up on it.
Except, like,
please get out.
But even in this lecture, what's very clear is that if you do the practices and you get good at it, you will become probably more productive, because you will be better. That zooming in, zooming out process is hugely important for accomplishing everyday tasks too. So it's this. So I'm wondering if like
can you read that top?
Yeah, the zoom effect. Yeah.
Assemble.
The stuff underneath isn't important. This is a sticky note that's been sitting on my monitor for about a year. It's got, so it's zoom effect, disassemble, assemble, metaphorical shifts. These are some concepts that I've been utilizing in a lot of systems dynamical thinking, and I think you're right. I think this is the psychotechnology of being able to zoom in and zoom out is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's shifting back and forth between the left and the right hemisphere. That's what you're doing, I think. It's the process of focusing your eyes and unfocusing, paying attention to the fovea versus the peripheral. It's that process all the time, and we engage in it naturally with our eyes, I think, all the time. And I think we can utilize various components of that normal process that we engage in to teach ourselves these mindfulness practices as well, like relaxing the eyes versus focusing and all of that. So
I see we're getting to the 3 hour.
Yeah.
Here.
Is there any things or takeaways from your guys' notes that you wanted to bring in still from the lecture?
I mean, I think I've taken a few mindfulness meditation courses. I really liked how he brought in certain aspects that I hadn't thought about before, and I've listened to Sam Harris as well on it, and so I think it's a very good lecture that everyone should look at. I think I think, at least to me, I'd like to achieve some enlightenment, but I know realistically what I do is I meditate for a few weeks every day, and I love it, and then I forget about it for a few months, and then I come back to it. But I think thinking about it in terms of practicing getting better at the zooming in, zooming out, which is undoubtedly beneficial for just our everyday non-meditative practices, it is worthwhile. And that's one of the takeaways I took away out of this that I think.
Yeah, the way he described it, almost like an exercise of doing reps, has really changed the way I think of it. Because when trying to do meditation before, it's very hard to understand why you're doing it. And I think, I don't know, some of what he talked about here really helped with that. All right.
Yeah. Eventually, what I ended up learning was that all these benefits that come out of meditation, right? They just help me operate in the world in a better way than I otherwise would have.
Mm-hmm.
So that keeps the game going, like Tyler was saying, the game of life is. But when I do meditation, it's like obviously some part of me is after those benefits, but otherwise it's also about when I went to that 10-day course, I was convinced that there is something to be discovered here. like, what is this state like when all the illusion has gone away? So it's kind of a curiosity. Yeah, that's why I do it, to figure out, to get to that consciousness level, the one Sam Harris describes. And I guess that is also kind of an attachment to that goal. So I myself practice it the wrong way, because I'm always waiting to get to that next level of consciousness.
I just want to point out that people will live in the most extraordinarily horrible circumstances for their entire life, and they will not voluntarily decide to end this life, right? They will go through Auschwitz or a concentration camp and come out the other side and write a book like Viktor Frankl did. Okay, there are elements to this whole well-being and avoiding suffering thing that just cannot be squared with the manner in which things seem to persist. That's why I can't bring it down to just seeking well-being for the game of life. All right, because there are no there seem to be no restrictions on the manner in which it's employed in this world, right? And again, branch outside of the human biological niche and you get some crazy stuff, right? And even within us, there are elements to our being that we have no clue about, like the relationship that we have with all the tiny organisms that exist in our body that we have yet to discover. But there is something to this game of life which is not bound neatly within the Sam Harris attempt to move us towards just the well-being, but it's something like it. I'll definitely get on that side of the fence with Sam, because it's the subjective experience that has a preference for something in that direction, right? It's just acknowledging also at the same time that you cannot move in one direction without simultaneously understanding the opposite direction, right?
We should have a stream.
Move in one direction is it. To move in one direction requires at least the opposite direction be true.
And so, I should say, I came up with my survive, thrive, and be happy before I heard Sam Harris. So I came up with mine.
I think that's, it's really intuitive, right? It's a kind of intuitive sense that a lot of us have, but
we should do a whole talk. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole topic on itself. So that's definitely something we should do on.
Yeah. All right.
On what topic?
Like objective morality.
What we should be moving towards.
Like what's our goal? What's our goal of the game of life? Is it well-being? Or Tyler's suggesting there's something more, which is or something less in a way, because I think survival in a way is I see survival as the bare minimum. I think survival is what we need to be able to do any other goal. So
you have let's say you have nested goals. You have the largest goal of life, which is just to keep playing the game of life. And then you can nest goals within.
Yeah, and we'll have to get into this because I see it as the opposite. I see we can't achieve any other goals if we're not playing the game. So rather than that being our end point, that's our beginning point. Because
so when I say down, I mean that's the ground of the game. So
right.
We agree.
Yeah. John, it's a surprise because all these monks wandering in the streets, right? Like even Buddha was just kind of a beggar, if you want to be honest about it. I guess what I'm saying is people have gotten enlightenment by just being out there on the streets.
But remember, those monks in that culture, they have a system where monks go around and people just give them food. So they took care of survival, right? They have a way of getting their food.
We just do that here by putting them on YouTube or Instagram.
That's right.
What?
But we should say that this is a whole different
influencers or celebrities.
That's right.
People who beg.
We impart well-being to them. We assume that Robin Williams is immune to depression or Lewy body dementia.
Okay.
And when we find out that he isn't, our whole world collapses.
I don't know. What POD is saying goes against what is written in this book, World Learn, because I read some part of it, and he just totally demolishes this whole survival argument. What he basically says is what you need to do to in order to survive is like basically nothing.
Well, let's have a whole different conversation on just that. That's a whole great topic.
Yeah. All right. So we'll wrap it up here. This has been the Bevry community kind of discussing John Vervake's 9th lecture in his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on Insight. So if you like to participate in any of these, you can join in on our Discord, and we have plenty of different channels that we have these types of conversations in text form and then also in our voice chat as well. Or you can go to our forums, which is discuss.bevry.me. If you would like to know when the next conversation or meeting or live stream is going to be happening, that's on meet.bevry.me. And yeah, so yeah, we should be here next week to discuss episode or lecture 10 of Vervake's series. So thank you all for joining, both Tyler, Sumit, and Pleasure of Doubt, and also for anybody who's watching this in the future or that might have popped in as we were streaming. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.